Chapter 873. Paris Hilton had always been pampered and spoiled since she was a child. When she heard Gwyneth Paltrow ordering her around like a servant, her heart instinctively resisted, but she did not dare to refuse. In order to get into this small circle, which was said to be the top group of girlfriends in Hollywood, she had put in a lot of effort. As she was very close to Drew, Gwyneth Paltrow was undoubtedly the queen of this small circle. However, although Paris Hilton nodded obediently, she did not give in. In the blink of an eye, she ordered her little follower, Kim, spread out everyone's yoga mats. After saying that, Paris Hilton immediately smiled fawningly at Gwyneth and said, "Just let Kim do it." Seeing that Paris Hilton wasn't listening to her, Gwyneth made up her mind to kick her out. She ignored Paris Hilton and moved closer to Eric. She was about to continue the topic from before when she heard Eric's voice. Eric, who had watched the real-life Queen Bee and her follower interact, looked at the black-haired girl who was ordered by Paris Hilton to start spreading out the yoga mats with interest and asked, "Your name is Kim?" When Eric said this, Gwyneth Paltrow, Paris Hilton, and the other girls who had just come out of the changing room all looked at the black-haired girl who was lying on the wooden floor and spreading out the yoga mats. Except for Paris Hilton, the other girls, including Gwyneth, did not even know the black-haired girl's name. They did not even care much about Paris Hilton. Although this girl who had just been approved to enter the circle was also from the famous Hilton family, Hollywood was the world of these natives. If an outsider wanted to enter this circle, it was not possible to do so with just money. If they wanted to enter this circle with just money, they would only be mocked as a bumpkin nouveau riche. Looking at the black-haired girl in front of them, she was just Paris Hilton's follower. She looked young, was a little short, and was not a pure Caucasian. It seemed that the only thing that could be seen was the 2 lumps on her chest. Why would Eric be interested in such a little bumpkin? The black-haired girl had never thought that she would become the focus of everyone's attention today, let alone that Eric Williams would notice her. During the brief contact just now, she only dared to sneak a few glances at the excessively young Hollywood mogul. It wasn't until all the girls in the room turned to look at her that the black-haired girl was sure that Eric was talking to her. She quickly straightened her body and stuttered, "Why, yes, Mr. Williams. My name is Kim Kardashian." Eric's eyes swept over Kim Kardashian, whose body proportions were still considered normal at this time. With a somewhat ambiguous smile on his lips, he nodded and said, "Very interesting." The other girls came out of the changing room one after another. The girl, who had changed into a pink long-sleeved yoga outfit, was whispering something to Kate Hudson. She had just walked out of the changing room when she heard Eric's words. Her eyes also noticed Kim Kardashian, who was still kneeling on the floor in the middle of the crowd. She walked over with a smile and asked, "Eric, what's so interesting?" Eric shook his head and said, "It's nothing." Drew tilted her head in confusion. A girl beside her secretly glanced at Kim Kardashian when Eric wasn't paying attention. The girl smiled and ignored it. She turned to the group of girls and said, "Okay, get ready. We'll only practice for an hour today." The girls immediately took action. They took their yoga mats and spread them on the floor. Drew walked over to Eric and sat down beside him. She looked at Kim Kardashian, who had lost her attention in the blink of an eye and was obediently helping to spread out the yoga mats. She saw that the girl seemed to be looking over with some reluctance. She smiled and said, "Eric, are you interested in her?" Eric smiled and put his arm around the girl's waist. He said, "Yes, I think it's very interesting." The girl saw that Eric had no intention of explaining, so she didn't ask. She said, "I've discussed with everyone. We'll go to Kate's house for barbecue at noon and another Kate's house for a party at night. Her house is in the Coldwater Canyon next to the Trousdale Manor. Also, Gertie is filming out of town, so there's no one at home. We can play all night, okay?" "Okay, I'll listen to your arrangements today." Eric nodded. He thought that the first Kate should be Gwyneth. However, he looked at the group of girls in the practice room. In addition to the few groups that had just arrived, there were 17 or 18 girls in total. After a pause, Eric glanced at the girls and said, "They won't be the only ones today, right? It's supposed to be a weekend for us girls, but if you want, they can call their boyfriends over." Forget it." Eric thought for a while and shook his head. Although his body was young, he really didn't have much in common with a group of young boys. As for being surrounded by a group of girls, well, even if there was nothing to talk about, it still felt pretty good. The girl smiled. She saw that everyone had already laid out the yoga mats. The yoga instructor named Victoria Price had also entered the practice room. She leaned over and kissed Eric on the cheek. She said, "Then we'll start practicing. It's only an hour, so it won't take long." Eric patted the girl's waist and said, "Go ahead. I'll read a magazine by myself for a while." The 1-hour yoga class, which made Eric feel a little hot, quickly ended. After leaving the yoga club, the group of girls drove 5 cars and personally went to buy ingredients for the noon barbecue. Then, they rushed to Gwyneth Paltrow's mansion, which was also halfway up the Beverly Hills. The old Paltrow couple happened to be at home. However, after greeting Eric, they were urged to leave by Gwyneth. The barbecue started at 11 o'clock in the morning and lasted until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The girls then went shopping on Rodeo Avenue. However, because Eric was there, the girl didn't bring a large group of girls to shop. Instead, she targeted a few specialty stores and went straight back to Kate Hudson's house. However, even so, it still took 3 hours. Eric could only admire the girl's shopping ability. There was a mansion halfway up Coldwater Canyon. It wasn't as wide as Drew's mansion in Trousdale Manor, but it was bigger. It was a European-style 2-story mansion with a large swimming pool in the yard. Eric didn't enter the mansion to see the girls count the spoils of war. He just lay on the deck chair beside the swimming pool, enjoying the warm afternoon sun and listening to the girls' faint conversation. Drew quickly came out of the mansion and lay down beside Eric. He handed him a glass of juice and reached out to fan Eric's head a few times. He said, "Eric, are you bored?" "No, it's very interesting." "Oh, really?" The girl could feel that Eric wasn't being polite. She still didn't believe him. She regretted bringing Eric out today. Eric took a few sips of juice with a straw and put the glass aside. He nodded and said, "Of course. It feels, like watching a reality show. It's quite interesting." Drew blinked and said, "Reality show?" "Yes." Eric nodded and suddenly turned his body sideways. He said, "I suddenly feel that this is a good idea." Although he had accompanied a group of girls with an average age of 20 for the whole day, Eric didn't feel bored because he rarely had this kind of experience. Watching a group of girls wandering around Beverly Hills, which was coveted by thousands of people, listening to them chatter about fashion, movies, Hollywood gossip, and other topics, Eric even felt like he was watching a Hollywood reality show of girls' lives up close. At this time, Eric thought of Kim Kardashian, who he had just met in the morning, and suddenly realized why not just do such a reality show? Drew also understood and said, "Eric, you're not saying that we should turn today's experience into a reality show, are you?" As he said that, Gwyneth Paltrow and Kate Hudson walked over with the other girls. Gwyneth Paltrow asked curiously, "What reality show?" Eric sat up slightly and looked at the group of girls surrounding him. He smiled and looked around and said, let's turn your lives into a reality show. Is anyone willing to participate?" Gwyneth Paltrow and the other core girls didn't respond. With their families' connections in Hollywood, they all had very good prospects. Even if they couldn't become famous, they wouldn't be reduced to participating in a reality show to increase their fame. However, in a large group of girls, of course, not all of them were like Gwyneth and the others who didn't lack opportunities. A few girls standing outside the crowd immediately nodded excitedly and said, "Okay, Eric, what should we do?" "That, I haven't thought about it yet." A girl asked, "Then, is it like Project Runway?" Eric shook his head and said, "No, Project Runway and Survivor are all competitive reality shows. What we want to do is a lifestyle show." In recent years, reality shows had just become popular. Basically, they were all competitive reality shows. The format of reality shows were far less diverse than after the new era. Hence, a girl immediately asked, "What's a lifestyle show?" A girl added, "How stupid. A lifestyle reality show is, of course, a lifestyle reality show." This girl obviously didn't know much about it. Everyone laughed. Eric said, "It's different from those competitive reality shows. A lifestyle show will use a camera to record all your lives for a period of time. After editing, it will be broadcasted on TV." Gwyneth said, "Eric, if we do that, won't we have no privacy at all?" Eric shrugged and smiled. "If you want to be famous, you have to sacrifice your privacy. So, if you really want to participate, you have to consider it carefully." There was a brief silence. Gwyneth and the other girls had some interest at first, but it was now gone. They were very unwilling to expose their private lives to the public. However, although most of the girls looked hesitant, there was no lack of girls who were obviously eager to give it a try. Drew was lying next to Eric. At this time, he had already realized that such a reality show was obviously very suitable for E. It couldn't be more entertaining. This TV station's main focus was on fashion and entertainment. In fact, it was to satisfy the audience who were interested in entertainment gossip. Directly turning the Hollywood lifestyle that many people yearn for into a reality show would definitely attract a lot of viewers. However, looking at the different reactions of her girlfriends, the girl was not in a hurry to say anything. Acquisition of E. Entertainment was still in the early stages of contact. It was better not to reveal such news in advance. "All right, Eric, today is entertainment time. Let's not talk about this. Guess what we just found?" Eric looked around in confusion and asked, "What is it?" Kate Hudson, who was on the other side of Eric, looked at her watch and said, "They should have sent it over." Just as she said that, everyone heard the doorbell ring. Kate Hudson immediately got up and walked to the door. After a while, she came back with a photo album in her hand. The girl had just sat up. At this time, she got up and took the photo album from Kate Hudson. "Come, let me see first. Wow, so hot, hee hee." The group of girls immediately surrounded her and started chattering. "Wow, is this Kate's mother? So cool. This hairstyle is not bad. Maybe I can get one in a few days. I've always wanted to keep my hair short. These aren't tattoos, right?" There was a burst of lively discussion. Eric listened casually and could roughly guess the content of the photo album. It was probably Gotti Hawn's photo album of human graffiti. He did not expect that the girl would really help him find it just by casually mentioning it. As he thought about it, the girl had already shown the photo album to Eric and said, "Eric, look, is this it?" Eric took it and flipped through a few pages. He nodded. In the photo, Gotti Hawn looked like she was in her 20s. Compared to Kate Hudson, who only had average looks, Gotti Hawn was obviously much prettier when she was younger. She even had a playful aura. Kate Hudson also came over and asked curiously, "Eric, why are you looking for my mother's photo album?" "Nothing, I just thought of it," Eric explained simply and handed the photo album to Kate Hudson. He did not have the hobby of collecting other people's mother's photo album in front of a group of girls. That would be too evil. However, before Kate Hudson could reach out her hand, the girl had already snatched it away. She smiled and waved it around, saying, "Everyone, I suddenly thought of the theme of tonight's party. What do you think?" "Drew, you mean we should also—" "Of course," the girl immediately nodded. The group of girls immediately looked at Eric. Gwyneth Paltrow smiled and said, "Then, what about Eric?" Eric immediately waved his hand and said, "No, don't count me in. Well, if you want to play, I can be your photographer and take some photos as souvenirs. I'm better at that." However, the girls started to jeer. "No, Eric, we're going to paint our bodies. How can you not come?" That's right, that's right. If you don't play, Eric, we won't come either. At least, Eric, you can't dress like this. Shirt and pants. You don't look like you're going to a party." "Hee hee, I wonder if Eric has abs," a girl said, her small hand already reaching out to touch him. The girl smiled and looked at her friends for a while before saying, "Okay, let's go prepare the paint." Actually, Eric can not only be a photographer, but he's also very good at painting. Later, if you want to paint anything, he can do it. Chapter 874. Half an hour later, someone delivered a full set of paint tools. They filled the entire long table in the courtyard, and there was even a mini studio set up on the lawn next to it. This was obviously one of the countless conveniences that rich people could enjoy. Eric was urged by the girls to change out of his original outfit and was only wearing a pair of beach shorts. The girls also changed into beautiful swimsuits and surrounded the long table full of paint tools. Seeing Eric skillfully mix the dyes, Gwyneth Paltrow asked, "Eric, these things won't hurt the skin, right?" The pampered girls were obviously very concerned about this, and there was a worried look in their eyes. "Of course not. These are plant-based paints. The toxic ones are chemical paints like acrylic," Eric explained. He mixed the last paint in the palette with water and looked up. "Here, that's it. Everyone, let's do it together. After the paint is mixed, we can start drawing." Kate Hudson said, "Eric, we don't know what to do. What should we draw?" "Graffiti. Of course, I'll draw whatever I think of. The more casual, the better. This is a good opportunity to practice brainstorming," Eric explained. Seeing that the girls were still confused, he said, "All right, I'll give you a demonstration first. Who's going to be my model?" Before the group of eager girls could open their mouths, the girl giggled and said, "Of course it's me." Since Drew said so, no one dared to compete with her. The girls who were originally around the long table gathered again and surrounded Eric and Drew in the middle. Eric looked at the girl standing in front of him and moved a high stool to sit down. He looked up and down at the delicate body wrapped in a light blue bikini and smiled. "Let's brainstorm together. If you really can't think of anything, go find a dictionary and randomly find a word. Then continue to diverge. Of course, if you can think of a theme, the effect will definitely be better." Gwyneth Paltrow's eyes turned and she blurted out, "Eric Williams." Eric was puzzled. "What?" Gwyneth Paltrow laughed. "Didn't you ask us to brainstorm? I just thought of it, Eric Williams." Yes, Eric Williams." The girls regained their senses and started to heckle him. "Eric, how should we draw this?" The girl also looked at Eric with a smile, her face full of anticipation. Eric smiled and nodded. "All right." As he said this, Eric thought for a few seconds. He didn't touch the paintbrush on the table. Instead, he dipped his left finger into a few different paints from the palette and skillfully painted a layer on his right palm. Then, he asked the girl to come closer. He stretched out his hand and pressed it against the girl's small waist. A rainbow-like palm print suddenly appeared on the white skin of the girl's waist. The girls looked over curiously. Although everyone felt that it was very beautiful, someone still questioned, "Eric, does this have anything to do with Eric Williams?" "Of course." Eric nodded and said, "An image can be transformed into anything. Words, comics, anything related to it will work as long as there is a connection. If you say, Eric Williams, I'll draw my own portrait on it. How boring would that be, right? All right, let's continue." The girls obviously agreed with Eric's point of view. No one said anything else. After Eric finished speaking, Kate Hudson also rushed to say a string of numbers. 10880. All the girls present obviously knew the allusion to 10,880. They all laughed and agreed. "Looks like I'm going to be the theme." Eric smiled. This time, he picked up a paintbrush and drew a string of orange-printed 10,880 on the girl's arm. "What's next?" Pandoran. "Well, this is more difficult." As Eric spoke, he did not hesitate much. He picked up a very thin paintbrush and asked the girl to come closer. He dipped it in some sky blue paint and gently drew 2 sky blue antennae above the girl's bikini cover. Then, he changed the paintbrush and added a cartoonish baby's head under the antennae. He also added 2 small hands on the cover's fabric. After finishing, the whole piece of graffiti looked like a Pandoran baby with the same sky blue eyes. It poked its head out of the girl's cover and looked around. "Wow, so cute." "Hee, Eric, is this what you looked like when you were a child?" "This must be a very perverted Pandoran, hee." They laughed and commented, and the atmosphere became more lively. Words related to Eric popped out of the girls' mouths. Jurassic Park, Shell Villa, Victoria's Secret Angel, Firefly, and so on. After more than half an hour, the girl's body was covered with more than 20 graffiti. After drawing a small dinosaur that seemed to want to climb up the girl's calf, Eric put down the paintbrush and said, "Okay, I can't add any more. This is just right. If it's too dense, it will be ugly." Drew looked at Eric, put down the paintbrush, raised his arm and turned in a circle. He said, "What do you think?" "It's so cool. Eric is really good at painting. It's even more beautiful than Kate's mother's graffiti." The girls looked at the graffiti on the girl's body and exclaimed in admiration. In Eric's previous life, he started to learn painting from elementary school because he was interested in cartoons. He studied for more than 10 years until he graduated from university. Because of his profession, he basically never stopped practicing. His painting skills were not much worse than a professional painter's. At this time, it was just a simple graffiti, but the visual beauty was still not something an ordinary person's casual painting could compare to. The girl proudly showed it, then pulled Eric up and said, "Eric, help me take a picture. I also want to collect a thick photo album today." Eric was pulled up by the girl. He nodded and said to the other girls, "Then, everyone is free to do whatever you want. I will also help you take a picture later." The girls were already eager to give it a try when they saw Eric's graffiti. At this time, they all walked to the long table and began to choose paints. They were also chattering and discussing. It was already evening, and the light was a little dim. Eric adjusted the lights with the help of the twins beside the simple setup studio. Although they were also wearing bikinis, they were obviously out of place with the girls. He said, "You two go play too." The twins only shook their heads and quietly retreated to the side. Eric did not force them. Regardless of appearance or figure, the twins were much better than the girls present. Because of this, it was hard for them to be accepted. After all, most girls would only choose people of the same age who were not as beautiful as them to be their followers. It was just like how Paris Hilton chose Kim Kardashian to be her follower. Probably only the girl would be so confident to bring the twins around all day, as if she was not worried about her limelight being stolen. The girl was already posing in front of the studio. When she heard Eric's words to the twins, she smiled and said, "Eric, you can also draw some graffiti for them later. I recommend you to use your fingers. When I do my skincare, I always bring Natasha with me. Their skin might be better than mine." Eric adjusted the direction of the additional light. He felt the twins look at him at the same time when they heard the girl's words, but they quickly looked away. He smiled and said, "Natasha and the others are the prettiest when they don't draw anything." The girl wrinkled her nose and said, "Humph, you actually praised other women in front of me. I'll be jealous. I'll really be jealous." Eric walked to the camera and looked at the effect. He said, "Okay, stop fooling around. Let's start shooting. Raise your chin a little higher. Yes, hold it." Amidst the continuous sound of the shutter, the dozens of film rolls were quickly used up. Eric was about to change another roll of film when the two girls at the long table ran over. Gwyneth Paltrow laughed and came to Eric's side. She used his body to block Kate Hudson, who was chasing after her. Kate Hudson chased after her with a soda bottle in her hand. "Gwyneth, stop right there. You drew so ugly. You must have done it on purpose." Gwyneth Paltrow retorted, "I didn't. I drew it very seriously." Eric held the camera stand and looked at Kate Hudson. Most of the graffiti on the girl's body was dark. It didn't match the light pink bikini at all. Although it wasn't too horrible to look at, it definitely wasn't good looking either. Seeing that the two women had been chasing him for a few laps without any intention of stopping, Eric tried to smooth things over. "Okay, don't break the camera." Kate Hudson stopped and pointed at the graffiti on her body. "Eric, look. Did Gwyneth draw it randomly? It's too ugly." Gwyneth Paltrow stood beside Eric and held his arm. "That's because your figure isn't good to begin with." Kate Hudson immediately raised the soda bottle again. "I'll hit you." Gwyneth Paltrow looked at the girl who was walking over, and then glanced at her own work on Kate Hudson. Compared to the two, Her own graffiti could only be described as too horrible to look at. Shaking Eric's arm, Gwyneth Paltrow said unwillingly, "Eric, we saw that your drawing was very simple. Why is mine so ugly? Have you practiced English writing? Like cursive?" Both Gwyneth Paltrow and Kate Hudson shook their heads. Eric said, "Actually, it's very simple. People who have practiced calligraphy have a foundation in calligraphy. Even if they write casually, they will look very good. But if they haven't practiced, no matter how seriously they write, their writing won't have any beauty. It's the same with drawing." Because of the commotion, the other girls came over. Hearing Eric's words, they all compared the graffiti on the girl's body with their own work. They realized that Eric's work, whether it was a single graffiti or a whole, looked very comfortable and cool. But their own drawings, although they had put in a lot of effort, lacked beauty no matter how they looked at it. Actually, this wasn't just because of their painting skills. It also involved their personal aesthetic qualities. As a director, Eric's pursuit of visual beauty was almost instinctive. Just like the graffiti on the girl's body. Because she was wearing a light blue bikini, Eric had chosen mostly warm colors. The overall style of the graffiti was also more cartoonish and very uniform. Even if the other girls had learned to draw, they wouldn't be able to do this in such a short time. After hearing Eric's explanation, Kate Hudson understood. She glanced at Gwyneth and said, "Speaking of which, you're still too stupid." Gwyneth was not to be outdone. "If you're so good, why don't you draw the same effect as Eric?" Kate Hudson said, "Of course. Let's go. It's my turn to draw on you." "No, I won't let you draw. It'll definitely be uglier." Gwyneth immediately shook her head. In the blink of an eye, she swung Eric's arm. "Eric, can you draw for me? I still have to take photos for Drew. You guys, play by yourselves. I see that you've already taken a few rolls of film. Isn't that enough?" Gwyneth said, then turned to the girl and said, "Drew, can you let Eric draw for me?" Drew also wanted to rest for a while. Although she knew that her best friends wouldn't let go of the chance to steal men from her, she had enough confidence in Eric. Moreover, even if Eric was really interested in any girl, she didn't really care. It wasn't certain who would benefit. She smiled and nodded. The girl said, "Okay, you guys go ahead. I'll go and eat something first." Gwyneth immediately pulled Eric to the long table. Kate Hudson followed beside them. She held Eric's other arm and said, "Eric, can you draw for me later?" Eric watched as the girl walked to the buffet table. He nodded and said, "Okay, if there's enough time. Then I'll go and take a shower first." Kate Hudson immediately let go of Eric excitedly and walked into the villa. When the other girls saw Eric nod, they all came over to beg. Eric could only wave his hand and say, "Don't make a fuss. If I draw for all of you, I might not even be able to finish by tomorrow morning." The girls were all disappointed, but they still gathered around and looked at Gwyneth Paltrow proudly standing in front of Eric. Eric looked at Gwyneth's black bikini and didn't ask for her opinion. He picked a brown brush and started to draw next to Gwyneth's navel. Soon, a picture of a small box appeared on her skin. "What's this, Eric?" Gwyneth lowered her head to take a look. The girls around her were also curious. Eric smiled and said, "Let's guess." Of course, there's no reward for guessing correctly. Even though Eric had said so, the girls still started to talk about it. Pandora's box. Apple box. Pet's home. After a round of chatter, Eric just smiled and shook his head. After a while, most of the girls frowned in disappointment. At this moment, a nervous voice sounded from the periphery of the crowd. I just watched 7 Deadly Sins last week. This seems to be the box that contained Trish's head. The color and style are the same." The girls looked over. It was the black-haired girl named Kim Kardashian. This girl seemed to have caught Eric's attention in the morning, but everyone quickly ignored her. However, it wasn't that no one in the crowd had watched 7 Deadly Sins. Hearing Kim Kardashian's words and looking at the small box on Gwyneth's stomach, it really did look like it. The atmosphere paused for a moment. Then, a girl muttered unhappily, "A box that contains a head. How is that possible? It's too scary." Although they somewhat agreed with Kim Kardashian's guess, they were obviously unwilling to let this mystery be guessed by a little follower. Eric just glanced at Kim Kardashian and nodded with a smile. "That's right. It's the box that contains Trish's head." The girls were in an uproar. Gwyneth also felt inexplicably creeped out. She raised her hand and had the thought of erasing the picture. However, she looked at Eric in confusion. "Eric, why do you want to draw this?" 7 Deadly Sins. Eric smiled without showing any mischievous expression. He said seriously, "I plan to draw a horror movie theme." "Well, if you're afraid, let someone else do it." "Me." "Eric, let me do it." "Let me do it. I love horror movies." Gwyneth was originally a little creeped out, but seeing that a group of little bitches wanted to snatch it from her, she immediately said, "Of course not. I also like horror movies." "Alright then. Let's talk about the next movie. Scream, that ghost face." Eric smiled and nodded. He picked up a brush and stood up. He smiled and said, "This is more suitable for the shoulder." Gwyneth Paltrow took the initiative to turn her body sideways and cooperated. From time to time, she would take the opportunity to chat with Eric. This time, the speed was faster. In less than half an hour, Gwyneth Paltrow's body was covered with all kinds of classic Hollywood horror movie logos. Gwyneth Paltrow imitated what Drew did not long ago and turned around to show everyone. She suddenly thought of something and said, "Eric, can I also have an Eric Williams handprint?" Eric looked up and down and smiled. "There's no more space. It won't look good if you add more." Gwyneth Paltrow glanced in the direction of the villa. The girl had just brought the twins in. Every time she thought of the girl's obedient twin attendants, the luxurious Trussdale Manor, and the huge fortune the girl had obtained through her identity as a major shareholder of MGM Pictures, Gwyneth would feel so jealous that her heart felt like it was being scratched by a stray cat. "If that little B*TCH can have it, why can't I have it too?" Gwyneth took a deep breath and quickly made up her mind. She smiled mischievously and said, "Why not? There's still space." As she said that, under the surprised gazes of the surrounding girls, Gwyneth reached behind her back to unlace her bikini and took off her bra. She confidently straightened her body and said, "Eric, why not? There are still 2 more." Eric raised his eyebrows. Hearing the laughter of the surrounding girls, he smiled and said, "Are you sure?" "Of course, Eric. Don't you dare." "All right." Eric smiled and nodded. He said, "But I think it's better to only print on one side. An asymmetrical graffiti is actually more interesting." "Hee, then help me draw something on the other side." "No problem." As Eric said that, he picked a die and applied a layer of paint on his palm. Without hesitation, he imprinted it on Gwyneth's chest. On the other side of Gwyneth, a great white shark opened its mouth and attacked. Eric waved his hand around as if he had not had enough. He smiled and said, "Then, who else wants it?" "Ah. Haha, Eric, you big baddie. I won't let you take advantage of me. Don't even think about it." The girls played around, but in the end, they all allowed Eric to imprint a Eric Williams handprint on their bodies. However, most of them were imprinted on other parts of their bodies. There were not many who dared to be as bold as Gwyneth Paltrow. They played around until 2 in the morning. Not only were all the paints used up by the girls, but they also ran out of film. They even called someone in the middle of the night to send over 100 rolls, but they were still used up. The European-style 2-story villa in the manor had 8 bedrooms. It was enough for everyone to stay in. In the end, none of the girls left. Everyone rested in the villa. He didn't know if it was because he was familiar with the bed, but Eric woke up before 7 in the morning. The girl in his arms was sleeping soundly. Eric quietly put on his clothes, washed up, and walked out of the guest room. Perhaps it was because it was too early, but the twins, who usually woke up early, were not awake yet. The villa was silent. He walked down the spiral staircase to the living room downstairs. The girls had gathered here to dance. It still looked a little messy. There were alcohol bottles scattered everywhere, and there was a strange buzzing sound coming from the stereo in the corner. Eric walked to the stereo. He could not tell what was wrong with it, so he simply unplugged it. Only then did the sound disappear. When he walked out of the villa, the sky was already bright. The fresh and cool morning air greeted him, instantly clearing his mind. He wondered if Kate Hudson's family had ordered newspapers. Eric walked to the front door and looked. There was a roll of newspapers in the mailbox. He took it out and returned to the courtyard. He heated a glass of milk in the kitchen and sat down at the long table in the courtyard where the paints were placed last night. Like the living room, the courtyard was a little messy. There was some paint scattered on the ground. It would probably be troublesome to clean it up. The studio was still standing on the lawn, but the expensive Lycra camera had been put away. Eric did not pay attention to his surroundings. He slowly drank his milk and flipped through today's newspaper. A figure flashed out of the villa. It was Kim Kardashian. "Morning." Eric turned around and casually greeted her. He was not very interested in this girl. He just felt that it was a coincidence. Chapter 875. Kim Kardashian didn't sleep the whole night because she had been thinking about Eric asking her name yesterday. Kim Kardashian instinctively felt that Eric must be interested in her. At first, she was quite excited. If she could get close to such a big shot, no one would treat her like air in the future. But for the whole day, Eric's attitude towards her was nothing special, which made her nervous and disappointed. After the party, she tossed and turned in bed for a few hours. Seeing that the light had already come through the window, she walked out. She didn't expect to see Eric awake so early and sitting in the yard reading the newspaper. Hearing Eric greet her, Kim Kardashian quickly responded, Good morning, Mr. Williams." With that, Kim Kardashian stood in place and waited for a moment. Seeing that Eric's attention was back on the newspaper in his hand, she hesitated and quietly walked over to sit on the other side of the long table. She looked around and tried to find something to say. "Mr. Williams, are you reading the Los Angeles Times?" "Yes." Eric responded and took a sip of milk next to him. He casually glanced at Kim Kardashian next to him and saw that she was sitting across the long table. Her body was slightly leaning towards him. Because she was only wearing a tight white tank top, her breasts were bulging as if they were placed on the table. This visual stimulation made Eric choke and spit out a mouthful of milk. Kim Kardashian had noticed Eric's gaze and was a little proud. Seeing that he choked, she quickly got up and came over. "Mr. Williams, are you okay?" Eric waved his hand and saw Kim Kardashian hand over the box of tissues on the table. He quickly took it and pointed to the other side of the long table. "Don't come over. Sit across from me." Kim Kardashian was stunned and stepped back, feeling wronged. But she still deliberately continued to pose. After Eric cleaned the milk stains on his clothes, Kim Kardashian hesitated and suddenly said, "Mr. Williams, this is real." Eric opened another newspaper and casually said, "It looks fake." "No, really." Kim Kardashian shook her head and looked around at the empty surroundings. She mustered up her courage and said, "If you don't believe me, you can touch it. You will definitely be able to feel it." "Forget it. I won't give you an identification certificate even if you touch it." Eric shook his head with a smile and said, "Are you from New York?" When Kim Kardashian heard Eric take the initiative to ask her a question, she quickly said, "Yeah, how did you know?" Eric shrugged. "I just think that the Hiltons must live in New York." Kim Kardashian didn't want Eric to think of her as Paris Hilton's follower. She explained, I'm just classmates with her. We came to Los Angeles together during the summer vacation. And, I'm staying at my dad's house. He's a businessman. He used to run a record company, and now he's running a juice business." Eric felt that something was wrong. He looked up and asked, "Your father is Robert Kardashian?" Kim Kardashian's eyes suddenly lit up and she quickly nodded. "Yes, Mr. Williams. Do you know him?" "That's right. Robert Kardashian, the famous defender of O. Simpson's wife murder case." But something was wrong. These were obviously the memories of Eric's previous life. According to the information in his mind, O. Simpson's wife murder case should have happened in 1994. Because it involved deep-seated racial issues, coupled with the background of the recent Los Angeles riots, this unsolved case almost touched the nerves of the entire United States in the original spacetime. It could be said to be a sensation. However, in this spacetime, it was already 1997. Eric had not heard any news about O. Simpson's wife murder case. It seemed that some things had changed again. I seem to have heard from someone, Eric said perfunctorily to Kim Kardashian. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind. He said, "From what you said, your parents should be divorced, right?" "Yeah, my stepfather is Bruce Jenner. He used to be an Olympic champion, but now he mainly focuses on TV shows." "Oh, what about your mother?" "Her name is Kris," Kim Kardashian said. Then, she said, "My mother likes Project Runway very much. She often says that one day, she also wants to participate in a reality show production or something." Eric did not expect Kim Kardashian to suddenly mention this. He remembered the idea of a reality show about Hollywood girls yesterday. This project definitely needed a producer. He and the girl could not do it themselves. Bruce Jenner and Kris Jenner, the husband and wife who single-handedly created Walking with the Kardashians in the original spacetime, were obviously very suitable. Perhaps the two of them lacked some experience in program production, but in Hollywood, where there were millions of people working in the film and television industry, there was never a shortage of technical production talents. What they lacked was ideas that could make these ideas popular and the ability to execute them. In this regard, the Jenner couple, who could be said to be unscrupulous in creating hype, were definitely much better than ordinary producers. After sorting out his thoughts, Eric smiled and asked, "Is your mother really interested in reality shows?" Kim Kardashian was a little confused, but she still nodded and said, "Yes." In that case, Eric looked around and simply took a piece of paper from the newspaper beside him. He found a pen and wrote a string of numbers on it. He handed it to Kim Kardashian and said, "This is the phone number of my assistant's office. Give this to your mother. Of course, didn't you say that your stepfather's energy is currently focused on TV shows? If that's the case, he can also participate." Kim Kardashian took the newspaper with the phone number written on it in a daze. Although she was still in high school, she did not lack life experience because of the environment she grew up in. At this time, she instinctively felt that her family might be turned upside down because of this newspaper. She tightly held the number in her hand and began to stutter again. She said, "Mr. Williams, and then? Do you still remember the idea of a Hollywood reality show for girls that I mentioned yesterday? Tell this to them. In a week's time, come up with a reality show proposal and show it to me first. If I'm satisfied, your stepfather and mother can be the producers of this project." "Ah." Kim Kardashian felt a little incredulous. Producers, in Hollywood, were the most powerful class. Moreover, the producers of TV shows were even more powerful than movie producers. Looking at the number on the paper again, Kim Kardashian still asked with uncertainty, "Mr. Williams, you're not joking with me, right?" Eric shook his head and said with a smile, "Your breasts are so big. I'm afraid you won't understand if I'm joking." Kim Kardashian really did not understand this joke. She just blushed and said, "But my stepfather and mother are in New York. Moreover, my mother has to take care of my two younger sisters. Kendall and Kelly are not even 3 years old yet." Eric shrugged and said, "That's not my problem. If I don't see the proposal in a week's time, I'll forget about it." Kim Kardashian did not dare to bargain with Eric. She nodded obediently and said, "Then, okay." Because it was summer and a weekend, the girls basically woke up one after another near noon. After the twins got up, Eric asked them to drive him back to the girls' mansion in Trussdale Manor. He dealt with some work emails in the morning and wanted to start writing the outline of Fast and Furious in the afternoon. After the group of girls woke up, they rushed over and forced Eric to go crazy for half a day. 3 days after the weekend, The Lion King 2 took first place on the charts with a first weekend box office of $38.9 million. The second place, Prison in the Sky, only had a box office of $24.1 $1 million US. There was a difference of more than $14 million US between the two. Compared to The Fifth Element, which was screwed over by Sony in May, which only had a box office of more than $22 million US in the first week, Prison in the Sky was obviously not that bad. However, even if Firefly's Titanic, which had just exceeded $600 million US in North America, compared to The Lion King, the box office figures of Prison in the Sky could only be considered a failure. At the same time, due to the fact that the box office performance in several countries that opened at the same time did not meet expectations, and the reputation of Prison in the Sky barely reached the passing mark, the box office prediction agency and Firefly's distribution department both greatly lowered the original global box office estimate of $300 million US. Considering the upcoming blockbusters such as Godzilla and Batman and Robin, The Hollywood Reporter even lowered the North American box office estimate of Prison in the Sky to $80 million US, and the global estimate was only $180 million US. Firefly also lowered the global box office estimate of Prison in the Sky to $200 million US. Based on this estimate, Prison in the Sky was unlikely to bring profits to Firefly in the box office. The company could only pin its profit prospects on later releases of videotapes and peripherals. Although anyone who knew a little about the industry knew that The Lion King 2 and Prison in the Sky did not have much of a box office competitive relationship, it was an indisputable fact that The Lion King 2 far exceeded Prison in the Sky in the box office. Paramount Pictures, which was severely suppressed in the early publicity process, played up the hard-won victory of The Lion King 2. After the box office for the first 3 days was released, they couldn't wait to announce a celebration party. Correspondingly, because Paramount Animation's 2 consecutive animated films, The Wind Princess and The Lion King 2, had achieved box office success, Firefly did not even release an animated film last year. The industry also began to question Eric's decision to sell Disney's hand-drawn animation studio. A newspaper in San Francisco even criticized Eric's move to sell Disney's hand-drawn animation studio as Hollywood's stupidest business decision. Due to the emergence of these opinions, the box office performance of Finding Nemo, which was about to be released in 2 weeks, became more eye-catching. Firefly's executives had naturally seen the Finding Nemo film. However, although everyone affirmed the excellence of Finding Nemo, most people were not confident that this animated film could surpass The Lion King 2. After all, the release date of Finding Nemo was sandwiched between Godzilla and Batman and Robin. But even if they understood this, it was impossible to make any adjustments to the schedule at the moment. Everyone could only secretly hope that the box office of Godzilla and Batman and Robin would not explode so high, leaving more room for Finding Nemo to survive. Although the main cast had not been confirmed, the main creative teams for the 2 projects of Spider-Man and Iron Man had been established. Cameron and his old partner John Landau were responsible for Spider-Man, and Eric was the producer of Iron Man. Marvel Pictures had also officially signed a director's contract with Joss Whedon. After the weekend, Eric began to have frequent meetings with the head of Marvel Pictures and the creators of the 2 teams to discuss the script, casting, budget, and other issues of the Iron Man and Spider-Man projects. According to preliminary estimates, the research and development of the special effects technology and testing of the 2 films would take half a year. At the same time, due to the large scale of the production, once the project changes after the official start of filming, it could bring millions of dollars of losses to the company every day. Therefore, the preparatory work in the early stages also required repeated consideration of all the details. This part of the preparation time would be more than half a year, and it was not impossible for it to be delayed for a few more years. Iron Man, in the original space-time, had been in preparation since the 1990s, and the official start of filming was in 2007. Cameron's Avatar sequel was delayed into a lifetime series. Of course, Eric would not let the 2 projects be delayed for so long. Iron Man had a preliminary project schedule, and the film would officially start shooting in March next year. The shooting was expected to take 4 months, and the special effects production might take 8 months. If everything went well, the film would be officially completed in March 1999 and released during the summer of that year. As for Spider-Man, Cameron basically overturned the original script and began writing a new plot himself. At the same time, Cameron recently had a sudden idea. In order to make the scene of Peter Parker flying between the high-rise buildings in New York more realistic, he asked the Digital Domain to develop a set of special effects software. These obviously would take a long time, and Eric only hoped that the project could start shooting around the end of next year. As long as it could be released during the summer of 2000, everything would be fine. While paying attention to the two projects of Marvel Pictures, Eric also took the time to write the outline of The Fast and the Furious, and gave it to the girl to find a screenwriter to supplement. In the past, the development of the series had always been stumbling. The success of the first film seemed more like a coincidence, and the subsequent films did not have good box office sales. It was not until the fourth film that the series began to enter the mainstream of Hollywood blockbusters. This time, although Eric did not have to take so many detours, it was impossible to do it overnight. The script for the first episode was still roughly based on the plot of the first film in his previous life. After all, the success of the fourth film in the series was also the result of the gradual popularity of the first few films. The busy workday quickly passed, and on June 6, the box office of The Lion King 2 and Prison in the Sky for the first week was released. Sony Pictures' highly anticipated Godzilla also opened on more than 3,300 screens in North America. Chapter 876. Since its birth in 1954, Godzilla could definitely be regarded as the most famous monster in the world. As the first big movie after Godzilla entered Hollywood, and with the most popular CG special effects in recent years as a gimmick, even if Godzilla fans all over the world were not mentioned, just the popularity of this monster alone was enough to attract a large number of audiences to automatically go to the cinema. Therefore, Sony Pictures had high hopes for Godzilla. Not only did they offer Roland Emmerich an unprecedented $20 million salary and 15% of the box office in North America, but they also ambitiously formulated a trilogy plan from the beginning. The production budget for the first film was increased from the initial $120 million to $150 million. Due to the stimulation of the global box office explosion of Titanic, Sony Pictures, who was confident of hitting the $1 billion global box office, increased the film's publicity budget to $70 million. The intensive TV trailer bombardment and overwhelming poster publicity made Godzilla the most talked about super blockbuster of the summer season from the very beginning. The audience's anticipation far exceeded that of Batman and Robin, and James Bond, Casino Royale, and other summer blockbusters. Under the lavish marketing campaign of Sony Pictures, almost no one in Hollywood doubted that Godzilla would be the most attractive film in the summer. In order to avoid Godzilla, the week after June 6 was completely monopolized by Godzilla. Even the independent films of small film companies that like to compete with summer blockbusters did not choose to release this week. The opening of more than 3,300 screens also equaled the opening record set by The Mummy 2 last year. With Titanic having just set an unprecedented box office record, the entire film industry was not sure if another box office monster would appear in Hollywood soon. Therefore, except for Sony Pictures, most of the film companies in Hollywood were anxiously watching the box office data of Godzilla. Even if Godzilla only showed half of the box office potential of Titanic, the other films that followed would also be affected to varying degrees. Godzilla also seemed to live up to expectations. The midnight box office on the day of its opening was a huge $6.25 million. One had to know that Jurassic Park, which broke the midnight box office record a few years ago, only grossed $4.59 million at that time. However, perhaps it was true that the higher you stand, the harder you fall. After the midnight opening, on Friday, the major newspapers in North America poured a bucket of cold water on this blockbuster. It's spectacular. It's really spectacular. It seems that special effects blockbusters are not omnipotent. Early in the morning, in a mansion on the top of Beverly Hills, Elizabeth was obviously a little excited as she flipped through the facts sent by Fox's distribution department. However, there was a hint of jealousy in her tone. Although they had the convenience of an alliance with Firefly, and also owned shares in the Australian branch of Digital Domain, which allowed them to use the best special effects production resources in the industry, Fox did not release any special effects blockbusters this year. Other than Star Wars Episode 7, which was basically not involved in the production, Fox's other special effects film projects were in the early stages of preparation. Eric took the breakfast from Julia and turned on the laptop on the table. He glanced at Elizabeth and joked, "What error is this? You're still using such an old-fashioned way of communication. Come, let me introduce you to Yahoo's corporate email system." Elizabeth rolled her eyes at Eric and said, "The price is so expensive. When I submitted the budget, it was almost rejected by the board of directors. If I had known, I would have used AOL." Elizabeth suddenly remembered that AOL was also a company invested in by Firefly, so she said, "Microsoft's corporate email system might be good too." Julia went to the kitchen and brought her and Elizabeth's breakfast over. She sat down at the table and asked, "Liz, what did you just say? Is it the movie review of Godzilla?" Elizabeth was interested again and said, "Yeah, let me read it for you. This is a portion of the movie reviews that the company just compiled this morning. Entertainment Weekly. Although there are some exquisite and exciting scenes, this trashy sci-fi blockbuster that costs $150 million is far more embarrassing than shocking. Variety. Let's not talk about the boring scenes. This monster movie as a whole gives off a weird feeling. The director obviously didn't capture the soul of the story. Also, Roger Ebert also wrote a review in the Chicago Sun. You have to use your brain to accept such a movie, but my brain repeatedly insisted on using logic in its unwelcome parts. Haha, Roger is probably in the public relations department. However, although the film review sounds mild, the sarcasm is really embarrassing. This Arizona Daily Star is merciless. Unbearably dull and uninteresting. It's hard to imagine how anyone would like such a pile of excrement. TSK. TSK. I wonder if Sony had offended this film critic. Why is he scolding them so harshly? Elizabeth read more than 10 newspaper reviews in one go, and Eric only heard 2 reviews that could barely be considered as praises. All the major Hollywood movie companies were paying attention to the box office performance of Godzilla. Eric opened his email and saw that Firefly had also sent some reviews and data analysis of Godzilla. According to the review results of dozens of mainstream newspapers in the United States on Friday, Godzilla had just been released, and the movie's overall score had been pulled down to 3 points, which was not worth watching at all. Although the midnight box office of Godzilla reached $6.25 million, Firefly's distribution department predicted that under the influence of this ultra-low reputation, the box office of Godzilla might not exceed $80 million in the first week, and it would not meet Sony's expectations of breaking $100 million in the first week. Julia listened to Elizabeth read out a string of reviews and said with some disbelief, "A production cost of $150 million, it can't be that bad, right? Future Waterworld spent $175 million on it, but it's still got a lot of bad reviews. However, Godzilla seems to be even worse. I remember that Future Waterworld had an overall score of 4 points. Elizabeth said as she flipped through the stack of faxes in her hand and said, "Godzilla's overall score is now only 3 points, and it's estimated that in a few days, it will only be left with 1 or 2 points. This is so bad that it's ridiculous. Eric, could it be that you're behind this?" Eric closed the analysis file of Godzilla and opened the email of last week's box office statistics. He asked with a smile, "Have you forgotten your surname? Can't you tell if I'm behind this?" "Humph, who knows what tricks you're playing behind my back, but I'm suddenly a little curious about such a lousy blockbuster. Why don't we go watch it together tonight?" "Not tonight, Robert Agnew is in New York, and I have an appointment with Jeffrey and the others for dinner. Tomorrow, I'll get someone to book a small haul in advance. It's rare that you're willing to accompany us on the weekend." Elizabeth's eyes were filled with joy, and she habitually made a sarcastic remark. In the blink of an eye, she tactfully changed the subject. "By the way, how was the box office last week? The Lion King 2 ranked first, $55.7 million. Prison in the Sky, $34.2 million, ranked second." Eric only introduced the 2 movies and did not continue. He raised his head and smiled. The box office performance of these two movies is not very high, and the total box office for a single week is only $130 million, far from the limit of $200 million for the summer. So, if you had listened to me and placed Ice Age a week before The Lion King 2, the box office performance of Ice Age would have been very good under the stimulation of two different animation movies. I don't want to be used as cannon fodder by you. Ice Age is Blue Sky Studios' first movie, and it would be a huge blow if it failed. Why didn't you put Finding Nemo before The Lion King 2? I'm leaving a way out for Paramount. We can't be too much of a bully, right? Ice Age is different. The cost is only $59 million, the investment is not high, and there is not much pressure to make a profit. It's more suitable to coexist with the big guys. Due to the impact of the ultra-low reputation, although the midnight box office performance of Godzilla was good, it only earned $17.5 million on Friday, and the box office on Saturday only slightly increased to $19.3 million. On Sunday, the box office of Godzilla fell to a low of $16.7 million. Although the three-day box office for the first weekend reached $59.75 million, easily taking the top spot for the weekend box office of the summer. However, due to the continuous bombardment of negative reviews from the media for 3 consecutive days, the box office appeal of Godzilla seemed to have suddenly dissipated on weekdays, and the box office for the first day fell to just over $4.3 million. In the next few working days, the box office for Godzilla continued to decline. In the end, the box office of Godzilla for the first week was only $7,366. Although this box office was far higher than the $55.7 million for the first week of The Lion King 2, taking into account Sony Pictures' aggressive advertising campaign and the industry's general expectation that the box office for Godzilla would exceed $100 million in the first week, the box office for the first week of Godzilla was still far from a success. What's more, the extremely poor reputation of the film meant that it was destined to experience a major drop in the box office the next week. After The Lion King 2 grossed $55.7 million in the first week, the next week's box office only dropped by a very small 24%, earning another $33 million. In 2 weeks, the cumulative box office for The Lion King 2 reached $98.03 million, only one step away from breaking $100 million. This undoubtedly put more pressure on the upcoming release of Finding Nemo. However, because the market performance of Godzilla was not as strong, the next week's box office for Prison in the Sky also dropped by a considerable amount, only 32.3%. On the basis of the first week's $34.2 million, it earned another $15 million. The total box office for 2 weeks was $57.35 million, showing the potential to break $100 million again. Eric watched Godzilla with Elizabeth and Julia on the Saturday when it was released. Although there were many differences compared to his memory, after watching the movie, Eric also felt that the overall quality of the film did not exceed the media's evaluation, even if he did not complain about the weak T-Rex-style Godzilla image. Anyone who had seen Roland Emmerich's works would know that this director was very good at, or rather, liked to use a multi-story narrative structure. To a certain extent, this kind of narrative structure had also promoted the huge box office success of films such as Day of Independence. However, this narrative technique is not without limitations. It is obviously more suitable for global disaster films such as Day of Independence and 2012. By showing the different reactions of people in different social classes and different areas in the face of a devastating disaster, it creates a tense atmosphere before the disaster. However, a monster movie like Godzilla is obviously not suitable for continuing to use this multi-narrative story structure. A monster came and went on a rampage in Manhattan, New York, but the camera kept cutting away, dragging in a bunch of unnecessary characters. In the end, the focus of the story was completely lost, causing the entire plot to be extremely messy and without a clue. In this case, any audience would lose their patience after waiting for a long and boring time. At the end of the movie, the supposedly powerful Godzilla was easily destroyed by a few missiles. The audience, who had been suppressed by the chaotic and boring plot for 2 hours, could not feel any sense of relief. It would be strange if they did not curse in the end. Other than North America, the most important overseas market for Godzilla was Japan. The film was met with even stronger cold reception and criticism. Because the film was far below expectations, and the producers had completely subverted the image of Godzilla, the Japanese fans basically boycotted the film. Sony Pictures originally predicted that the box office of Godzilla in Japan would be comparable to the box office of North America. But in fact, in the same week as North America, the box office of Godzilla in Japan was less than $8 million, which was only 1/7 of the box office of North America. After the film was released, the person in charge of Toho Corporation, who owned the copyright of Godzilla, said that he would consider taking back the production authorization of Godzilla that Sony owned. If necessary, he would even resort to legal means. The first week's box office of more than $73 million was not considered dismal. But everyone knew that this box office was the result of a huge budget of $70 million. With such a one-sided negative review, it would not be surprising if the box office of Godzilla broke another record. The failure of the film was inevitable. Sony Pictures, which had not fully recovered, was once again in turmoil. Chapter 877. Morton Restaurant, Beverly Hills. Roland Emmerich sat opposite the CEO of Columbia Pictures, Bill Mechanic. He ate the steak in front of him in silence, trying his best to ignore the glances from the customers around him. He even regretted choosing this restaurant where Hollywood movie stars gathered. It was already the second week of the release of Godzilla, and it had been heavily criticized by the media for a week. When the box office figures for the first week of the movie were released in the morning, Roland Emmerich did not feel relieved at all. In the afternoon, he secretly drove to some cinemas in San Fernando Valley to take a look. Compared to last Friday's relatively high attendance rate, in just 1 week, most of the cinemas where Godzilla was screened were empty. He didn't even dare to imagine how much the movie's box office would drop this week. 60%, 70%, or even worse. There was no doubt that Godzilla would be a very disastrous Waterloo for his career. After many years of accumulation, Roland Emmerich already had a net worth of tens of millions of dollars. Even if he chose to retire now, he could guarantee that he would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of his life. But in the Vanity Fair of Hollywood, a person's success was far from limited to the scope of money. Most people cared more about career success and their own status and influence in Hollywood. Everyone wanted to climb to a higher position. As long as it was a slightly popular star in Hollywood, they basically had enough wealth to support their own wealthy or even luxurious lives. But these people would still develop all kinds of mental and physical problems under the pressure of the ups and downs of their careers. Because for most of the celebrities in Hollywood, being suddenly abandoned by Hollywood, without the pursuit of the spotlight, without the pursuit of thousands of people, this kind of loss was definitely more difficult to accept than suddenly losing all of their money. Although Roland Emmerich knew that this failure alone would not cause a devastating blow to his career, it also meant that in the next few years, unless he produced another film of the same quality as Day of Independence and The Clash of Worlds, he would never be able to enjoy the generous treatment he had before the release of Godzilla, such as the strong control over the production of the film, the top director's salary of $20 million, and so on. If it was before the release of Godzilla, he would not have to personally appear here tonight to discuss the follow-up contract with Bill Mechanic. In the past, these things only needed his agent to come forward. If he could do it all over again. When this thought came to his mind, Roland Emmerich immediately shook his head in self-mockery. He suddenly remembered that Firefly had just announced the director of The Day After Tomorrow. This project should have been his. Firefly might not offer a director's salary of $20 million, but since they had worked together on Collision and Day of Independence, Firefly couldn't be too stingy. He believed that with a fixed salary and dividends, it wouldn't be difficult for him to get a total income of $30 million equivalent to Day of Independence. At present, Godzilla had a salary of $20 million, plus a 15% box office share in North America, which might still guarantee him $30 million. However, due to the disastrous failure of Godzilla, in terms of both reputation and box office, his next film would definitely not be able to receive such a generous salary. The damage that Godzilla had caused to his popularity was immeasurable. Compared to Roland Emmerich's faint self-pity, Bill Mykanic's mood was even more irritable. Godzilla was a project pushed by Sony Pictures from top to bottom. Logically speaking, if the project failed, Sony should not be blamed for it. But this kind of logical reasoning would not happen to a Japanese company like Sony, which had a clear hierarchy in its management. If Godzilla was a success, everyone would be happy and celebrate. But now that it had failed, Sony's chairman Nobuyuki Ide would not be at fault. The CEO of Sony's American branch, Howard Stringer, would also not take the blame. Only Bill Mykanic, the person in charge of the movie business, could take the blame. Luckily, everyone in Sony knew what was going on. Although Bill Mykanic was the scapegoat, there would not be any substantial punishment. This was the only thing that made him feel better. However, there was still another very troublesome matter that he had to deal with, and that was the contract between Sony Pictures and Roland Emmerich. Sony signed a 3-film contract with Roland Emmerich because of the confidence of the company's management. Of course, Godzilla will not be able to make the next 2 sequels. But the contract between Sony and Roland Emmerich will not be voided. During the signing of the contract, both parties had discussed the solution if the sequels could not be made. The result of the discussion was that if the sequels to Godzilla could not be made, Roland Emmerich would have the right to choose any 2 films from Sony's other projects to direct. Dongbao's special Godzilla series had produced a total of 22 films over the past 40 years. No one had expected that after introducing Godzilla to Hollywood, it would be difficult to continue with just 1 film. Therefore, no one took this clause to heart at the time. But now, the total investment for Godzilla was $220 million. Based on the current situation, it would be impossible for the film to recover $150 million in North America. From the poor box office performance in Japan, the overseas market was not optimistic either. This project would definitely cause Sony to suffer a huge loss. As the producer and director who caused the project to fail, Sony's management wanted to strangle Roland Emmerich to death. Naturally, they were not willing to fulfill the terms of the contract. The hard task of resolving the contract naturally fell to Bill Mykanic. There were no directors in Hollywood who had never failed. Even Cameron, who had just created a box office miracle, had caused Fox to suffer a huge loss for The Abyss. But no one could be sure when these directors would make a comeback. Bill Mykanic had been in Hollywood for decades and naturally understood this. That was why he did not want to fall out with Roland Emmerich. When dinner was coming to an end, Bill Mykanic, who had been preparing his speech, finally talked about the main topic. Roland, I remember that Firefly has at least 5 disaster films. Your Crash and Day of Independence had very good box office sales. Williams would like you to continue working with Firefly, right? Roland Emmerich's mood didn't improve at all when he heard Bill Mykanic's words put him in the main seat. Of course, Eric had said that he was welcome to return at any time. However, Roland Emmerich had his own pride. He had given up on a good working relationship with Firefly for a high salary. Now that the project had failed, he naturally couldn't put down his pride and return to Firefly. Roland Emmerich knew why Bill Mykanic had asked him out today. He did not want to hold on to the terms of the contract. If both parties were not willing to work together, he would not be able to complete the project he had taken over from Sony. This situation would only affect the quality of the movie. If the project failed again, the wealthy Sony would only lose some money. But if they failed 2 more movies, Roland Emmerich would have no choice but to retire early. Roland Emmerich put down his cutlery and wiped his mouth with a napkin. Bill, thank you for dinner. So, why don't you tell me what Sony is thinking? Roland Emmerich's attitude made Bill Mykanic heave a sigh of relief. He said, It's like this, Roland. We've been preparing a project recently. It's a story about America's War of Independence. It's called Patriots. We haven't decided on a director yet. If you're interested, you can direct this movie. I have never done a war movie before, Roland Emmerich said. He suddenly realized something and asked, have you decided on the main lead? Bill Mechanic did not expect Roland Emmerich to react so quickly. He paused for a while and said, we are still in contact. There are two suitable candidates, Mel Gibson and Kevin Costner. The atmosphere between the two parties became silent again. Mel Gibson and Kevin Costner were not only A-list superstars in Hollywood. They were also nominated for Best Director Oscars for their war movies, Braveheart and Dances with Wolves, respectively. Regardless of which one of them was the male lead of Patriots, Roland Emmerich's control over the project as a director would be greatly reduced. In fact, even without him as a director, the project would still be able to proceed smoothly. Roland Emmerich felt that Sony had stuffed him into a movie that he was not good at as the director. It was more like they wanted him to be a vase who would not affect the movie. This arrangement was an insult to his status in Hollywood. Roland Emmerich took a sip of red wine from the table and calmed himself down. He asked, then, what if we terminate the contract directly? $1 million. Bill Mechanic had obviously considered this possibility. However, when he said this perfunctory amount of compensation, he felt a little embarrassed. He added, this is the highest amount I can make the decision for you. If you want, I can talk to Howard. Maybe we can increase it a little. How much could he increase it by? Roland Emmerich thought about it and felt a little conflicted. The solution given by Sony was very clear. He would be the director of Patriots. The film would have either Mel Gibson or Kevin Costner to back it up. The quality of the film and the box office would be guaranteed. Once the film was completed, both parties would be able to take advantage of the situation to get rid of the subsidiary clause. It was conceivable that if he accepted the director's job, the salary he would receive would definitely not be too high. $20 million or a share of the box office would definitely be out of the question. Even maintaining his $8 million fixed director salary for Godzilla would not be an easy task. But if he wanted to terminate the contract immediately, he could only get a symbolic amount of compensation. Moreover, if he lost this contract, after the failure of Godzilla, the other Hollywood studios would not easily work with him in the next 1 or 2 years. This was not because of his directing ability. It was because the negative reviews of Godzilla would definitely affect the box office appeal of his next movie. The first solution given by Sony was to make use of Mel Gibson or Kevin Costner's influence to minimize the negative impact. Obviously, Sony wanted him to terminate the contract voluntarily, but at the same time, they were not willing to pay too much compensation. That was why they came up with such a difficult solution. Sony also knew that Roland would not resort to drastic measures like a lawsuit to resolve this matter. After all, he had just messed up a big production. If he were to sue Sony, who would dare to work with him in the future? In the end, Roland Emmerich said, Bill, give me some time. Let me think about it. Roland Emmerich did not mention anything about terminating the contract again. Bill Mechanic knew that Roland Emmerich had decided to be the director of Patriots. Roland Emmerich was just not willing to put down his pride and immediately agreed. Bill Mechanic also did not rush Roland Emmerich. He was satisfied that this matter was settled without any unpleasantness. Both of them were not in the mood to continue chatting. When Bill Mechanic was about to wave for the waiter to settle the bill, there was a commotion on the other side of the restaurant. A man and 2 women walked out from a booth not far away, and the other customers started to greet them. Roland Emmerich heard the commotion behind him and turned his head to look. He happened to meet Eric's gaze. There were only 2 weeks left before the release of James Bond, Casino Royale. Eric could still slack off on the publicity work. But at the last minute, as the director, he had to participate in the publicity work. Today, he brought the girl and Amy Pascal to have dinner together to discuss this matter. Eric politely responded to the greetings of the people around him. He was holding the girl's hand and was walking out with Amy Pascal. He did not expect to bump into Roland Emmerich, and he stopped in his tracks. Recently, Eric was definitely one of the people that Roland Emmerich did not want to meet the most. It was the 2 movies that he worked with, Firefly, Clash of Worlds, and Day of Independence, that pushed him into the ranks of the super directors. It was also the reason why Sony offered him a huge contract in order to rope him in. Roland Emmerich felt bad about giving up the cooperation with Firefly because of the generous remuneration from Sony Pictures. Now, Godzilla had a terrible reputation and box office. Roland Emmerich felt even more embarrassed facing Eric. "Good evening, Eric." Although Roland Emmerich did not feel good, he still took the initiative to greet Eric. He hesitated for a moment and did not know if he should get up. "Good evening, Roland." "Oh, and Bill." Eric could see Roland Emmerich's current state of mind from his expression. There were many Hollywood insiders around. If he purposely stopped now, there would definitely be new jokes in Hollywood tomorrow. Eric did not want to embarrass Roland Emmerich too much. He only nodded to the two of them softly and they walked past each other. Roland Emmerich felt relaxed but also a little annoyed by Eric's reaction. He and Bill Mechanic looked at each other. Both of them did not want to pay the bill immediately. If they left now and met in the parking lot again, they would not know what to say. In the parking lot outside the restaurant, the girl was still hanging on to Eric. She smiled and said to Amy Pascal, "Haha, Amy, did you notice Roland's expression just now? It was so interesting." Amy Pascal just smiled and didn't agree with the girl's words. "Okay, stop gloating." Eric knocked the girl's head and said to Amy Pascal, "Regarding Entertainment's acquisition plan, you should discuss it as soon as possible. It would be best if you can come up with a result before the end of the month." Eric Warner Cable saw that we suddenly took the initiative in this transaction and did not seem to be in a hurry to sell their shares. "They might have guessed that you are interested in He's interested in entertainment." The twins drove the girl's Land Rover over. Eric did not rush to get in the car. He leaned against the car door and said, "I recently read some information. Basic Cable's Rainbow Media seems to be interested in selling. You can contact them at the same time. Rainbow Media's Bravo TV station and Entertainment are similar in nature." "I also noticed this." Amy Pascal nodded and said, "However, Basic Cable Company probably won't sell too many shares. Moreover, General Electric is also interested in Rainbow Media. They have been expanding their cable television business over the years. Basic Cable will definitely know which side has more potential to cooperate with. If possible, we don't need to ask for too many shares at once. We just need to get the operating rights. Moreover, your main focus should still be on Entertainment, Rainbow Media as a backup plan." Eric thought for a while and said, "However, I guess that after Batman and Robin is released next week, Warner Cable will be very willing to dump Entertainment's shares as a burden. If Time Warner's losses this year continue to expand, Terry Semmel's CEO position may be replaced." Amy Pascal immediately understood the meaning of Eric's words and asked, "Eric, you don't think Batman and Robin is good?" "I haven't seen the finished film of Batman and Robin, so I'm not too sure. However, if you pay a little attention, you will realize that Warner Cable has kept Batman and Robin under wraps. Until now, except for the trailer, there is very little substantive information related to the film's content. There are also no public reviews of the test screenings." Amy Pascal combed through the information in her mind and found that this was indeed the case. Warner Cable may have sealed the film's content before its release to maintain the film's mystery. However, there was another possibility, which was that they did not have confidence in the film's quality. They were worried that word of mouth would leak in advance and affect the film's box office. Chapter 878. Eric actually didn't care about Batman and Robin at all. Ever since Warner released the official TV trailer 3 months ago, Eric knew that the movie would go down the same path as before. In the short 1.5-minute trailer, neither the new Batman, George Clooney, nor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who played Mr. Freeze, moved Eric at all. Some of the lines also gave off a feeling that they were completely out of sync with the scene. The movie made people feel like they were watching a colorful and crude stage play. Eric was most concerned about Finding Nemo now. It was the movie he valued the most this summer. His expectations for this movie were even higher than James Bond, Casino Royale, which he personally directed. Today was the first day of the movie's release. In the morning, the reviews given by major media outlets were on par with The Lion King 2, which made Eric certain that this version of Finding Nemo would still do well at the box office. However, whether it could reach the previous global box office of nearly $1 billion would depend on the detailed box office performance. After saying goodbye to Amy Pascal, Eric and Drew returned to Trussdale Manor together. As soon as they entered the door, they were pulled into the shower by the maid. They soaked in the luxurious bathtub with a soft body in their arms. It was inevitable that they would be interested. After a while, it was already close to 10 o'clock at night. Unlike when Prison in the Sky was released 2 weeks ago, Eric was still looking forward to seeing the first day box office of Finding Nemo before going to bed, so he was not in a hurry to rest. He changed into a casual t-shirt and trousers and sat down on the balcony outside the living room on the second floor with a document in his hand. He could see through the transparent tempered glass fence into the distance without any obstruction. The lights of Los Angeles seemed to be spread out under his feet, magnificent and beautiful. This atmosphere made it difficult to open the document. Eric leaned lazily on the recliner and narrowed his eyes. After a while, the maid, who had finished her maintenance, floated over, wearing only a light tank top and hot pants. She squeezed into Eric's arms coquettishly. With a soft thud, the blue folder that Eric had casually placed on his body fell to the floor next to him. What? Drew's small body moved past Eric's body and curiously picked up the folder that fell on the ground. Just by looking at the cover, he recognized that it was the proposal for the reality show about the Hollywood girls. Although she didn't understand why Eric would find an unfamiliar woman to produce this reality show proposal, she didn't doubt Eric's judgment in her heart. In the past 2 days, she had deliberately flipped through it. She casually tossed the folder onto the table beside her. Just as she was about to stick it onto Eric's body again, she suddenly remembered something and said, "By the way, Eric, the set of photos from last time is done." The girl got up and was about to call for her when she remembered that she had sent the twins to rest. So, she jumped up and ran out of the balcony barefoot. In the blink of an eye, she floated back with 2 thick photo albums in her hands. "Hey, this one is mine, and this one is Kate's. It's really cool. Kate told me a few days ago that she wanted to publish her photos in a magazine." Eric got up slightly and opened the girl's photo album. He asked, "Don't tell me you want to publish it in a magazine too?" "No, I only want to show it to you," the girl said. Then, she smiled and said, "It's the weekend tomorrow. Do you want me to ask them to come over again?" "You go have fun by yourself. I won't go crazy with you." Eric shook his head and pointed to the folder that the girl had just thrown on the table. He said, "This matter has been delayed for a week. I happen to have time tomorrow, so I'll meet with the other party first." "Oh, then I'll come too." "Well, let them come here tomorrow. After all, this is also an MGM matter." Eric nodded and said, "Okay. However, you can also invite them to a party tomorrow night." Listening to the girl's persuasive tone, Eric smiled and said, "You like to push them to my side so much." The lass rubbed against Eric's body and said, "Do you like it? I know about what happened in New York. That was just a coincidence. I don't have so much time to deal with a group of crazy girls," Eric explained. However, speaking of this, he suddenly thought of another matter. He stared at the girl and asked, "I haven't asked you yet. Last time at the premiere party of Prison in the Sky, why did Helena look at you like a mouse seeing a cat? What bad things did she do?" "No, I'm very obedient," the girl said coquettishly. Seeing that Eric didn't believe her, she didn't try to hide it. She just explained casually, "I happened to hear an insensible little model talking about the party you held in New York. She almost made it to the gossip magazines, so I drove her back to Puerto Rico." Eric subconsciously thought about what kind of place Puerto Rico was. Naturally, he couldn't think of anything. He asked, "That's it?" The girl rubbed against Eric like a kitten again. Then, she still said vaguely, she was sentenced to 4 weeks in prison for illegal possession of contraband. Then, she was deported. But she was involved in these things anyway, so it wasn't too unjust. Eric sighed and didn't ask any more questions. With such a criminal record, the girl who was deported to Puerto Rico definitely wouldn't be able to easily apply for a foreign passport again. This was equivalent to her career coming to an abrupt end. Eric pinched the girl's face and didn't ask any more questions. He only said softly, "Don't go too far in the future. You know, those insignificant gossip can't affect me much." "Okay." The girl immediately nodded obediently. Her eyes were clear and she looked very sincere. Eric could only helplessly pinch the girl's face again. Seeing that Eric had let this matter pass, the girl relaxed. Her little hand restlessly groped Eric's body. She said, "Eric, I rented a Boeing business jet. It's bigger than the Bombardier and Gulfstream models. It can fly from the West Coast all the way to London. We can take this plane to the premiere of Casino Royale." A few days ago, Drew made a trip to London because of the release of Casino Royale. Since Firefly and MGM's corporate jets did not have the ability to fly across the ocean, the girl decided to save some money and took a passenger flight. In the end, according to the girl, she was so exhausted that she felt uncomfortable going back and forth. After returning to Los Angeles, she was exhausted for a few days. "I happened to hear Larry Ellison mention it last time. I just remembered." Eric thought for a while and said, "Don't you want to buy a Boeing 777? Contact Boeing and place an order." She mentioned it to Eric once out of curiosity. After being rejected, the girl didn't mention it again. Now that she suddenly heard Eric mention it, she was a little excited. She said, "Can we buy it now?" "Yeah." Eric nodded and suddenly smiled. "Not just a plane, you can buy anything you want. What's the point of living if you can't spend so much money? Hee, then I'll get someone to contact Boeing." The girl got up and ran out to bring Eric's laptop over. She opened Eric's email and sent an email to his assistant's office. Chapter 879. Eric's assistant office was responsible for almost all aspects of his work and life. It was even a bit like a butler team. The girl sent the email at this time as if she was very familiar with it. Obviously, this was not the first time she had done this. Drew also knew what Eric was waiting for. After sending the email, she patiently huddled in his arms and whispered to him. It was past 12 o'clock in the morning when the laptop that was always open sounded a new email notification. Eric got up and opened the email. He smiled and picked up the girl, who was already in a daze, and walked to the bedroom. If it was a lively party, the girl would have no problem staying up all night. However, in this quiet environment, the girl began to feel listless early on. Feeling Eric's gentle movements, the girl snuggled into Eric's body and curled up comfortably like a kitten. She mumbled in a daze, "Eric, Boeing how much?" Eric smiled and replied in a pampering tone, "Enough for you to buy a plane." Early the next morning, all the major newspapers in North America were buzzing with activity. This was because the Friday box office rankings in North America were all news points. Almost all the mainstream newspapers listed the Friday box office rankings prominently on the front page. Finding Nemo, US $20. 21 million-inch Chrono Contact, US $6. 86 million-inch The Lion King 2, US $6. 22 million-inch Godzilla, US $5. 95 million-inch Crisis in the Sky, US $3. 08 million. Even those who weren't sensitive to the box office figures could easily understand what was going on just by glancing at the various headlines in the major newspapers. Finding Nemo beats The Lion King 2 on the first day. Chrono Contact starts at US $6. 86 million. Paramount's sniping strategy fails. Godzilla drops 66% year-over-year. Amblin Pictures is dissatisfied with Paramount's investment in Chrono Contact. Cracks appear in the cooperation between the two sides. Summer animated films shine brightly. Live-action blockbusters that have been released have all failed. Batman and Robin and James Bond, Casino Royale, may follow in their footsteps. In this series of news reports, the new issue of The Hollywood Reporter gave a more detailed analysis article. First of all, I have to mention Titanic again. As of last week, the global box office of this legendary film with a total investment of US $265 million has reached US $2.33 billion, and the film has officially closed in North America with US $602.98 million. The amazing box office figures will directly bring $860 million of global box office revenue to Firefly Group. After deducting the costs, Firefly Group's net profit will be close to $600 million. Other than that, the sales of more than 70 kinds of related products for Titanic have also exceeded $850 million. The North American acoustic album of Titanic sold 5.6 million copies in its first 10 weeks of release. Interestingly, this figure only included physical album sales. It was reported that the Recording Industry Association of North America refused to recognize Yahoo Music's 1.25 million copies of Titanic digital sales data. The North American acoustic album of Titanic also easily exceeded 7 million copies in overseas countries. According to industry analysis, the global sales of Titanic may eventually reach 30 million copies. This alone will bring another $900 million of revenue to Firefly Group. Based on the relevant data, the movie Titanic will generate net profits of no less than $2 billion for Firefly Group in the next few years. In the entire Hollywood, only Firefly Group has a net profit of more than $2 billion per year among several major media groups. Stimulated by the huge profits generated by Titanic in the past 6 months, I have heard more than once that the 7 major Hollywood film companies are planning new blockbuster films. However, in the past month, the box office performance of Hollywood's live-action blockbusters will undoubtedly wake up the hot-headed Hollywood. Among them, the one that can bring Hollywood introspection the most is undoubtedly the monster movie Godzilla, which is a CG special effects blockbuster like Titanic. Sony Pictures' ambitious film with a total investment of $220 million had a global box office of $1 billion before its release. However, after the initial failure and continuous extremely negative reviews, the box office on Friday has been squeezed to 4th place. Compared to the $17.5 million on Friday, the box office number has dropped by 66%. The box office number has dropped rapidly to $5.95 million. It is estimated that the next week's box office will only be between $22 million to $25 million. The total box office number in North America will also be difficult to exceed $130 million. At the same time, the overseas box office performance of Godzilla was also disappointing. The film was even strongly boycotted by Godzilla fans in the most important Japanese market. According to insider information, Sony's top management has urgently stopped the preparation of the sequel to Godzilla. The person in charge of the project may also be forced to resign. As the director and producer of the film, Roland Emmerich is destined to be unable to achieve the same success as Day of Independence. Even before the release of Godzilla, Firefly suddenly announced that Michael Bay would be taking over the director of Firefly's famous disaster film series, The Day After Tomorrow. It is very likely that they were affected by the poor quality of Godzilla. As everyone knows, Roland Emmerich was once rumored to be the director of The Day After Tomorrow. Firefly's digital domain was responsible for most of the special effects of Godzilla. It was not difficult for Firefly to learn about the quality of Godzilla before the film was released. Other than Godzilla, starting from May, the French Gaumont Film Company's The Fifth Element, which cost $90 million, Firefly's Prison in the Sky, which cost $75 million, and Amblin's Transdimensional Contact, which also cost $90 million and was released by Paramount. Their box office performance can only be described as lackluster. Among them, The Fifth Element, which was released for 3 weeks, only had a cumulative box office of $47 million. The total box office in North America is expected to be difficult to reach $70 million. The 2-week box office of Prison in the Sky was only $37 million. Although the final box office may reach $100 million, it is still far below industry expectations. Similarly, Robert Zemeckis' sci-fi blockbuster Transdimensional Contact, after Forrest Gump, although the production cost was similar to Finding Nemo, which was released on the same day, this film, which used science fiction to deeply explore religious and philosophical issues, obviously did not gain the audience's approval. The box office on the first day was less than one-third of that of Finding Nemo. It was even lower than the $7 million of Prison in the Sky 2 weeks ago. Perhaps, Amblin Film and Paramount can only hope that Transdimensional Contact will be able to follow the box office curve of Forrest Gump, but based on audience feedback, this possibility is extremely slim. 4 consecutive big production live-action films have failed at the box office. It is inevitable that people will be worried about the highly anticipated Batman and Robin and James Bond Casino Royale in the next 2 weeks. At the same time, Hollywood may also need to calm down at this time and not overly pursue big investments under the stimulation of Titanic. However, in addition to the live-action films, the box office and word-of-mouth performance of the 2 animated films released one after another during the summer were pleasantly surprising. The second 2D hand-drawn animated film, The Lion King 2, after Paramount Pictures took over Disney's hand-drawn animation studio. Although it was suppressed by competitors in terms of marketing, the box office in the first week still reached $55.7 million. The next week, it only fell by a weak 24%, earning another $33 million. The 2-week cumulative box office reached $98.03 million. On the first day of the third week of release, although the year-on-year decline extended to 37% under the impact of Finding Nemo, with the advantage of the long-term release of animated films, the total box office in North America in the future may still reach $200 million, far exceeding the box office potential of several live-action blockbusters that have been released. Finally, the most important topic of today's topic, Finding Nemo. Before the release of Finding Nemo, due to the box office and word of mouth of The Lion King 2, which originated from Disney, the industry generally thought that Eric Williams's move to sell Disney's hand-drawn animation studio was extremely stupid. However, after Finding Nemo, many people had no choice but to shut their mouths. Only The Lion King 2, which cost 3/4 of its production cost, has an excellent word of mouth that is comparable to The Lion King 2. Even if Finding Nemo has much more convenient marketing resources than The Lion King 2, with the outstanding box office result of $7.41 million on the first day, we have to admit that 3D animated films are indeed more popular than 2D animated films. The box office on the first day is $21 million. Stimulated by the explosive word of mouth, the box office of Finding Nemo may reach as high as $90 million in the first week. Due to the long-term potential of animated films, Finding Nemo will undoubtedly be the first seeded player in the North American box office this summer that may reach $300 million. Even more boldly, if this box office and word-of-mouth advantage can also be played in the overseas market, Finding Nemo is very likely to catch up with the former The Lion King and become another animated blockbuster with a global box office of $1 billion. With the peripheral profitability of animated films far surpassing that of live-action films, the success of a new set of cartoon images will bring continuous revenue to Firefly's surrounding stores, game parks, and other industries. Here, the author even began to look forward to Ice Age, which will be released on July 4th. This is the first 3D animated film produced by Blue Sky Studios, jointly funded by Firefly and Fox. Although the cost is only $59 million, based on the author's impression of this animated trailer, Ice Age is likely to be another surprise in the summer. Perhaps the executives of other film companies in Hollywood should focus more on the development of animated films instead of catching up with the unreachable Titanic. The article in The Hollywood Reporter inevitably caused some Hollywood executives to reflect, and it would also prompt Firefly's competitors to speed up the deployment of the animated film industry. However, before this, Eric had always been very clear that Titanic was more like an anomaly, so he had never been impulsive about it. Eric originally planned to talk to Kris Jenner about the reality show during the rest day. Although the Kardashians' unscrupulous methods of hype in his previous life were disgusting, Eric was now the controller of a huge media empire, so his perspective on the problem was naturally different. In his position, there were 50 to 60 senior executives of Firefly that he could often come into contact with. There were thousands of senior executives above the level of Firefly's system manager, not to mention that the total number of employees of the entire Firefly group currently exceeded 120,000. In a circle like Hollywood, if there was any mental cleanliness, it would definitely be impossible to live a comfortable day. MGM's acquisition of E! Entertainment, in order to quickly open up the television industry, it was undoubtedly a very effective way to use someone like Kris Jenner who was good at creating hype. However, early on Saturday morning, Eric received a call from Kris from New York. The two talked for more than half an hour, and Eric had to cancel his weekend break and call for an emergency meeting with the senior executives of Firefly's distribution department and finance department, as well as the management of Clover Holdings. The matter was very simple. After 3 months of accumulation, the international financial oligarchy's attack on the Southeast Asian currency system was about to be launched. The two talked on the phone, and Kris would fly from New York to Tokyo, Japan. He might have to personally oversee the situation there for the next month. After the meeting at the end of April, Firefly Group began to speed up the pace of extracting the box office share of Titanic in Southeast Asia. At the same time, Firefly's summer release and upcoming releases in the second half of the year were sold to Southeast Asian film companies. Firefly was also very honest with the Southeast Asian film companies. The company was worried that the economic situation in Southeast Asia in the second half of the year would cause serious exchange rate losses, so they wanted to cash out early. Thai baht had just experienced an attack from international currency speculators in March, and the Southeast Asian film companies also understood Firefly's concerns. However, most of the film companies in Southeast Asia generally did not realize the seriousness of the matter. Logically speaking, even if the local currency depreciated by 10% or even 20%, for these companies whose business scope was limited to the local area, the impact of currency depreciation would not be too big. Stimulated by the box office of Titanic, the Southeast Asian film companies were very welcoming of Firefly's move to sell the distribution rights, so they all offered a price to buy the distribution rights. Since the beginning of May, through some financial means, Firefly had recovered the box office share of Titanic, which was equivalent to $50 million from Southeast Asia. The box office share in Japan had also begun to be settled. At the same time, after Firefly sold the Southeast Asian distribution rights for Prison in the Sky, Finding Nemo 2, and Jurassic Park 3 in the second half of the year, Firefly recovered another $75 million in cash. If it were not for the lack of appetite of these film companies, Eric actually wanted to sell the distribution rights for the entire next year. Of course, this was only a thought. Although $75 million was not a huge sum of money for Firefly, for the Southeast Asian box office market, which was only half of Japan's, this was the highest profit Firefly could squeeze out in a short period of time. Although the finance department of the group calculated that because of this aggressive selling strategy, if there was no economic crisis in Southeast Asia, Firefly could lose $10 million to $20 million, Eric knew that if they did not do this, when the economic crisis in Southeast Asia broke out, Firefly's losses would be far greater. When that happened, the currency in Southeast Asia would depreciate to half, and the box office that could be converted to $10 million would be converted to $5 million. If the Southeast Asian economy was devastated, the film industry would definitely be severely impacted. Although there was a view in the industry that the more depressed the economy, the more prosperous the entertainment industry would be. However, if the economy collapsed, Eric did not believe that people would still be in the mood to watch movies. Otherwise, Hong Kong films would not have completely declined after the economic crisis in Southeast Asia. Over the weekend, Eric checked the state of fund recovery in Southeast Asian countries. At the same time, he began to mobilize funds to prepare for Shamrock Holdings' next step of acquiring more technology stocks. The North American stock market was a very open global financial market. The violent economic shock in Southeast Asia would inevitably affect the Nasdaq index that had been soaring. In the next few months, with the outbreak of the economic crisis in Southeast Asia, the originally high Nasdaq index would definitely have a temporary decline. This was undoubtedly the best time for Shamrock Holdings to invest. While Eric was busy with these matters, on Saturday, the box office of Finding Nemo, which was already eye-catching at the beginning of the week, soared by 38% again, reaching $28.01 million. Although the box office on Sunday fell, the box office remained at a high of $22.03 million. In the first 3 days of the first weekend, the cumulative box office of Finding Nemo had reached an astonishing $70.25 million. This kind of strong box office explosion was amazing. A film critic from the Los Angeles Times even joked that Finding Nemo was reaping the box office of others for a week in one day. In fact, this was indeed the case in reality. This summer's two movies, The Fifth Element and Transdimensional Contact, which had a production cost of $90 million like Finding Nemo, only had a 3-week box office of more than $47 million. The latter was released at the same time as Finding Nemo and had a 3-day box office of only $58 million. Although the box office in the first week might be close to $30 million, even with a conservative 30% weekly decline, Transdimensional Contact could only recover $65 million in 3 weeks. It was still incomparable to the 3-day box office of Finding Nemo. At the same time, Finding Nemo was also more popular than Pixar's previous films such as Toy Story and Bug Crisis in some overseas countries where it was released at the same time. In the United Kingdom alone, the box office of Finding Nemo in the first weekend was $13.5 million. Before this, Pixar's best overseas box office performance, Toy Story 2, only grossed $6.1 million in the first 3 days in the United Kingdom. When this series of statistics was released, Hollywood and the North American entertainment media realized that they had been paying attention to the wrong person from the beginning. The most dazzling box office star of this summer was not The Lion King 2, Godzilla, or the upcoming Batman and Robin and 007, Casino Royale. It was Finding Nemo, which was not eye-catching before its release and was sandwiched between the two blockbusters, Godzilla and Batman and Robin. It was once considered cannon fodder. Chapter 880. On the 16th of June, the Wall Street Journal reported on the abnormal situation in Southeast Asia's foreign exchange market. In the major Asian financial centers of Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore, the exchange rates of Thai baht, Indonesian rupiah, and other currencies began to fluctuate significantly. Everyone in the circle felt a sense of urgency, as if dark clouds were pressing down on them. In the past few months, international forex speculators had been secretly buying Southeast Asian currencies, and the currencies of Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and other countries had experienced rapid appreciation. Thai baht's exchange rate against USD had reached 22.1, and the appreciation was close to 12%. After 2 days of accumulation, Soros's Quantum Fund and Tiger Fund's international forex speculators suddenly revealed their fangs to the Southeast Asian currency system on Wednesday. Since the opening of the major foreign exchanges, a large number of Thai baht orders appeared on the exchanges. The sudden attack caught the Thai government off guard, and they did not even have time to organize an effective counterattack. After that, Thai baht was dumped for 3 consecutive days, and the temporary appreciation of Thai baht returned to its original value. It even fell below the 25.1 average exchange rate in recent years. On Friday, Thai baht's exchange rate against USD had plummeted to 26.31, and the depreciation in 3 days had reached a shocking 19.5%. In 1997, Thailand's currency circulation was about 9,200 billion baht, and based on the 25.1 exchange rate in recent years, it was equivalent to $370 billion. But in just 3 days, when the exchange rate fell to 26.31, Thailand's currency value had fallen to $350 billion, and $20 billion of wealth disappeared. Many people knew that this was only the beginning. While the Southeast Asian currency market was in chaos, the North American summer box office competition was also fierce. After earning $25 million on the first weekend, the box office for Finding Nemo did not slow down at all. It continued to earn between $6 million to $7 million every day. In the end, the box office for Finding Nemo reached $97.45 million. Not only was it more than $66 million higher than the new movie Transdimensional Contact, it was almost the same as the total box office for the first 2 weeks of the same genre, The Lion King 2. Affected by Finding Nemo, the second-ranked movie Transdimensional Contact only earned $31.29 million in its first week. Following that, The Lion King 2's final drop expanded to 36%, earning only $27.09 million in the third week, with a total box office of $125 million, ranking third. The one with the worst box office performance this week was undoubtedly Godzilla, which was in fourth place. Due to the one-sided negative reviews and the strong impact of Finding Nemo, Godzilla's box office fell by nearly a terrifying 68% in the second week. The box office was only a pitiful US $23.57 million. The total box office for 2 weeks was US $97.23 million, which was even less than the box office of Finding Nemo in the first week. The dismal box office performance of Godzilla not only made Sony's ambition of $1 billion in the global box office a joke, even the media was too lazy to comment on this lousy movie that was destined to be forgotten. Although Firefly Pictures' Prison in the Sky was ranked fifth, due to the unsatisfactory performance of the two live-action blockbusters Godzilla and Transdimensional Contact, Prison in the Sky still maintained a good 34% drop in the third week, earning another $15.28 million. The cumulative box office rose steadily to $72.65 million. Although it was still difficult to predict whether the North American box office could exceed $100 million, Prison in the Sky performed quite well compared to The Fifth Element, Godzilla, and Transdimensional Contact. What's more, Prison in the Sky cost $75 million, which was the lowest among the live-action blockbusters, so there was not much pressure to recoup the cost. With the release of the previous week's box office data, Batman and Robin, which had been tightly suppressed by Warner Brothers, was finally released in more than 2,900 theaters in North America on Friday, June 20th. The quality of the movie did not disappoint many media and film critic speculations. The word lousy was not even enough to describe it. A review in the Wall Street Journal could roughly express the thoughts of the majority of film critics. In the entire movie, the images of the protagonists such as George Clooney, Uma Thurman, and Arnold Schwarzenegger are undoubtedly very similar to the comic book characters, but as for the story, the movie lines, the characters' acting skills, and other things, I really can't think of any comments. As a superhero character that had been a bestseller in North America for decades, Batman could be said to have the largest fan base in North America. However, with the frequent changes in the entire series and the decline in the quality of the movie, the patience of Batman fans seem to have finally been exhausted. Although the movie still won the one-day box office with $16.11 million on the first day, Batman and Robin was kicked off the top spot by Finding Nemo on the second day of release. Batman and Robin even set a record for the first Saturday box office drop in the summer. According to the usual box office pattern, for most movies, the box office on Saturday would be higher than the box office on Friday in the first week of release. Even Godzilla, which had also received a lot of bad reviews 2 weeks ago, had a box office on Saturday that was about $2 million higher than the box office on Friday. However, after Batman and Robin grossed $16.11 million on the first day, the box office fell to $15.09 million on the second day. After Finding Nemo was temporarily suppressed by Batman and Robin on Friday with $14.3 million, the box office on the second day bounced back to $17.5 million. The industry expected Finding Nemo to maintain a box office of more than $60 million in the next week. Its box office performance was even better than the first week of many blockbuster movies. In comparison, the box office of Batman and Robin was only expected to be $55 million in the first week. Based on production cost of this comic book movie of $125 million, because the overseas box office appeal of the Batman series was not even as good as Godzilla, Warner had to recover at least $80 million in the first week to break even with the box office. But now, it seemed that this hope was obviously very slim. The failure of Batman and Robin made many people completely lose confidence in the summer live-action blockbuster. MGM's James Bond, Casino Royale, which was going to be released next week, was naturally the first to bear the brunt. Some entertainment media were even gloating as they waited for the first box office failure of Eric's directorial career. Eric had no time to care about these comments in the media. The official outbreak of the economic crisis in Southeast Asia did not only affect Firefly Group's entertainment business in Southeast Asia, but also the entire Firefly Group. Nokia, Qualcomm, and LTD all had a lot of business in Southeast Asia. Nokia and LTD's main product factories were also located in Thailand, the Philippines, and other countries. Yahoo, Cisco, and other companies had also invested heavily in Southeast Asia in recent years. Once the currencies in Southeast Asia completely collapsed, the local businesses of these companies would be severely impacted. Eric had always liked to be a hands-off boss. Usually, Chris would help him take care of some of the things that he should have done. But this time, Chris went to Tokyo in person, so a lot of things fell to Eric. After all, with a lot of memories of the economic crisis in Southeast Asia in his previous life, Eric was happy to intervene and use his memories to make a more reasonable layout of the businesses of several companies. After being busy with various documents and conference calls for a whole week, Eric returned to Los Angeles from Qualcomm's headquarters in San Diego on Saturday afternoon. Only then did he have a short break and turn his mind to Hollywood again. Kris Jenner's mood for more than half a month could only be described as ups and downs. At the beginning of the month, her daughter, who went to Los Angeles for the summer, suddenly called her home in New York, claiming that she got an opportunity from Eric Williams to supervise a reality show. Kris Jenner's first reaction was naturally that her daughter was joking with her. It was a joke to connect their family with a big shot like Eric Williams. After her daughter repeatedly told her everything that happened that day in detail, and told her the phone number left by Eric, Kris Jenner dialed the number suspiciously. Although she immediately got confirmation from Eric Williams's assistant office, Kris Jenner was still stunned for more than half an hour, and then she was ecstatic. Kris Jenner had always been a woman who yearned for Hollywood fame and fortune. When she married Robert Kardashian, it was because he had his own record company and had a very wide network in the circle of TV, music, and sports celebrities. When Robert Kardashian sold his record company and turned to do an unrelated juice business, Kris Jenner quickly parted ways with him. A month after the divorce, she quickly married TV sports celebrity Bruce Jenner. However, although Bruce Jenner was a famous sports star in the 70s, his influence had long been reduced since his retirement. Now, he could only occasionally attend some TV shows or serve as a commentator on sports channels. He could barely be considered in the entertainment industry and Hollywood. As a loyal viewer of Lifetime TV, the sudden opportunity of being a producer of a reality show made Kris Jenner realize that if she could grasp it, she would definitely be able to reach the top in a single bound. This point, just look at the two producers and hosts of Project Runway and America's Top Model. There was no time to think about anything else. On the day the news was confirmed, Kris Jenner hurriedly dragged her husband and a bunch of children to Los Angeles. She stayed at her ex-husband Robert Kardashian's house and once again asked her daughter about the ins and outs of the matter. Kris Jenner bought a lot of reality show videos and related books. She began to write the proposal for the reality show while consulting and pondering. As for her daughter's information that Eric Williams could let her husband, Bruce Jenner, participate in the show, she automatically ignored it. A week later, Kris Jenner personally rushed to the headquarters of the Firefly Group in Burbank and handed the completed proposal to one of Eric's assistants. What followed was a long and torturous wait. In order to avoid the disgust of Eric's assistant, Kris Jenner only dared to call once every 3 days to ask for news. She originally hoped that her daughter, who had entered Drew Barrymore's circle of close friends, could help to find out some information, but then she found out that because her daughter's companion, the girl from the Hilton family, had inadvertently offended someone, both of them were kicked out of the circle. As for her husband and ex-husband, after asking, she found out that the two men who could barely be considered celebrities in Los Angeles were so far away from the core circle of Hollywood. Their social circle did not have any useful contacts at all. Although the Sharp Corner Manor was located in a prominent location in Malibu, Kris Jenner did not have the courage to take the initiative to go there, so she could only continue to wait. At the end of the second week, news came from Firefly that Eric would take the time to meet her. Before she could be happy, the meeting was temporarily cancelled, and then there was no news for a whole week. Chapter 881. On Sunday morning, Eric had a phone call with Chris in Tokyo to learn about the situation in Southeast Asia. In the morning, he rushed to Century City to meet with Harvey Wayne Stan. After handing over FFM to Wayne Stan to operate, FFM's headquarters was set up near the Fox Century City set. Last weekend, on June 15th, the first season of The Sopranos officially ended after 13 weeks of airing. With Harvey Wayne Stan's skillful operation, the reputation of The Sopranos continued to spread like a virus. With a good start of 1.76 million viewers, the ratings of the series continued to soar. When the last episode of the first season aired, the highest number of viewers reached 3.25 million, which was almost double the number of viewers of the first episode. Thanks to the influence of The Sopranos, FFM's popularity further increased, and the number of subscribers also increased. By the end of the first season of The Sopranos, FFM's subscriber count was close to 6 million. FFM's subscriber base was only around 4.5 million before The Sopranos began airing. Due to the low starting point and the support of the three media giants, everyone predicted that FFM would quickly grow like a seedling sprouting in fertile soil. However, in just one season, the number of new subscribers was close to 1.5 million. This growth rate was still incredible. In the same period, HBO's subscriber count was less than 500,000. From the moment the idea of establishing FFM was born, Eric wanted to compete with HBO. Therefore, while supporting FFM, Eric did not relax his attention on the operation of the FFM TV station. Since last September, Eric had participated in 2 to 3 operational meetings of FFM TV station every month. After a short period of adjustment, Harvey Wayne Stan quickly showed his outstanding ability in the TV business operation. In the last quarter, FFM's subscriber count skyrocketed. To be honest, The Sopranos could only be considered 30% of the credit. The remaining 70% was the result of Wayne Stan's outstanding business operation. Just like the PR process of the Olympic Games, ever since The Sopranos was broadcasted and established, Wayne Stan used newspapers, TV, and the internet to conduct deeper operations on The Sopranos. During the 3 months of airing, almost every episode of The Sopranos became the focus of the media. After the first season, The Sopranos became a godly drama in many people's minds. Correspondingly, FFM TV station's brand was even more deeply rooted in people's minds, and because of this, it brought in a large number of new subscribers. Wayne Stan's operation of FFM TV station was very similar to Netflix in his previous life. After 2013 in the original Spacetime, whenever Netflix was mentioned, most people would think of House of Cards. House of Cards was also a godly drama, but just like The Sopranos, the two series were only catalysts. The real reason for Netflix's rise was the company's outstanding business operation. Of course, some chemical reactions could not proceed without a catalyst. Without House of Cards, Netflix would not have been able to increase its subscriber count from 26 million to 40 million in just 2 years. Similarly, although The Sopranos did not play a decisive role in FFM's development, it was not negligible. However, behind the skyrocketing subscriber count, FFM TV station's operating costs were also increasing rapidly. Although FFM had the support of the three media giants, it was still an independent company that needed to be responsible for its own profits and losses. Whether it was Firefly or Fox, it was impossible for them to provide the film rights to FFM for free. In order to compete with HBO, FFM not only bought a batch of film and television rights to fill the broadcast time slots, but they also introduced a new film every week on average. In total, FFM would spend more than $300 million on film and television content this year, and the advertising budget for the TV station was also close to $200 million. In addition to the operating expenses of the TV station itself, FFM's annual operating costs would reach $700 million. On the other hand, in order to attract new subscribers, FFM also implemented a large number of discounts. This greatly lowered the average subscription fee. Although the subscriber count was increasing rapidly, FFM TV station's annual revenue was estimated to be less than $500 million, which was only one-third of HBO's annual revenue. This also meant that in 1997, FFM TV station shareholders would suffer a loss of at least $200 million. In fact, if FFM was less ambitious, they could rely on the three media giants' rich content resources and reduce their content and marketing budget. Even if they only relied on their current subscribers, they could quickly turn a profit and live a comfortable life. However, if they did this, FFM TV station would forever lose the possibility of becoming a premium cable TV station. In the future streaming media era, FFM was destined to be one of the first traditional cable TV stations to be eliminated. Of course, Eric would not let this happen. He would either not do it, or try his best. Even if the end result was not satisfactory, Eric would not allow FFM to be satisfied with the status quo from the very beginning. Not to mention, the average annual loss of $200 million would only be a few tens of millions based on the shareholders' shareholding. In recent years, everyone was doing very well. Paying tens of millions of dollars a year on a premium cable TV station with huge growth potential was not unacceptable. However, Eric also knew that after the dot-com bubble burst, the cable TV companies, who were also beneficiaries of the new technology wave, would have a hard time for a long time. When the time came, losing tens of millions of dollars a year would be difficult for them to accept. Eric also hoped that when the time came, he would be able to take back the 20% shares that he distributed to the major cable TV companies. With FFM TV's current growth rate, the total subscriber count would exceed 8 million by the end of 1997. It was almost certain that they would reach 10 million subscribers next year. However, once the subscriber count reached 10 million, it would be like a fast-growing seedling entering its mature stage. The growth rate would slow down and it would start a more direct battle with HBO. In the conference room at FFM TV headquarters, Eric listened to Harvey Weinstein's report and said, "Harvey, isn't your contract for 5 years? How about this? If you can increase FFM's subscriber count to 20 million by the end of your contract, I can promise to increase your option share by 50%. Harvey Weinstein left the stage and returned to his seat. He smiled and said, "Eric, your offer is very tempting, but it won't be easy. Whether it's Firefly, News Corporation, or MGM, they don't have a national cable TV network like Time Warner. The major cable TV companies are only small shareholders in FFM, so they can't fully support the TV station. Time Warner's cable TV network will definitely crowd out FFM. Telematics is also eager to build their own premium cable TV station, Stars. There's also the Basic Cable Company, which has a very close relationship with Viacom. These factors will limit FFM TV's further expansion. In my opinion, when FFM reaches 15 million subscribers, it will hit a bottleneck. If you want to break through, the three of you will have to buy a national cable TV system that can support FFM TV's further development. Otherwise, I can only promise to increase FFM subscriber count to 15 million by the end of my term." Harvey Weinstein's contract started in July last year and ended in July 2001. It was a total of 5 years. This period happened to be the most turbulent period for new technology. Although the dot-com bubble would have burst by the time Harvey's contract expired, Eric couldn't be too hasty to make a move. Of course, Eric also couldn't buy a cable TV company before the dot-com bubble burst. That would be a waste of money. Since that was the case, Eric couldn't fulfill Harvey's request. Under Weinstein's expectant gaze, Eric finally shook his head and said, "I don't have this plan for the next few years, but you can discuss it with Rupert." Weinstein shrugged helplessly. He had actually talked about this with Rupert before. News Corporation already had a satellite TV and cable TV network, but the scale was relatively small. Also, News Corporation had been focusing more on the development of the TV station in recent years. They weren't too interested in the cable TV business. They stopped talking about this topic and talked about other things in the conference room. It was close to noon when the meeting finally ended. Harvey Weinstein tidied up the documents in front of him and glanced at Peter Ritchie, who had been sitting beside Eric today. He still had a harmless fat smile on his face as he said, "Eric, let's have lunch together later?" Eric smiled and said, "Of course, even if you didn't mention it, I would still ask you to buy me lunch." Other than attending the FFM operations meeting, Eric had another purpose in coming here today. He wanted to formally introduce his assistant, Peter Ritchie, to Harvey Weinstein. Actually, Eric had already talked to Wayne Stan about this at the beginning of the year and he was already prepared. When he first established FFM, Eric didn't intervene too much in personnel matters. Now, he was just inserting a manager, so it wasn't a big deal. In a restaurant near Century City, most of the management of FFM TV station had already left. There were only 4 people sitting in the room: Eric, Peter Ritchie, Wayne Stan, and FFM's vice president and head of production department, Brad Gray. As for Harvey's brother, Bob Stan, he was still focusing all of his energy on Mike Mira and was not working at FFM. Eric didn't approve of FFM's acquisition of Wayne Stan's former assistant, Brad Gray's production company. However, Weinstein eventually brought him into the company to be in charge of the program production department and bought Brad Gray's production company for $5 million. This deal didn't involve a lot of money. It wasn't even as much as FFM's purchase of the broadcast rights for a popular movie, so Eric didn't object too much. After they ordered lunch, they talked about the arrangements for the September Emmy Awards for The Sopranos. Harvey Wayne Stan took the initiative to talk about Peter Ritchie's arrangement. "Peter, I want you to be Mark's assistant in the marketing department. Mark Levinson, I introduced him to you this morning. He's currently the manager of the marketing department. You can familiarize yourself with him for a while. If there's a position you're more interested in, I can make the appropriate adjustments." FFM's current scale wasn't that big. They only had less than 200 employees. As a pay TV station, the most important departments were film procurement, program production, and brand marketing. In the future, when FFM's self-produced content became richer, they might even add a copyright operation department. Other departments like finance and human resources were also important, but they wouldn't have much impact on FFM's development. In recent years, due to FFM's rapid expansion, the company's brand marketing department became even more important. If Peter could join this department, he would have more room for development in the future. Although Eric had already discussed it with him, Peter Ritchie was still a little excited when Wayne Stan officially mentioned it. Deputy Manager of the Marketing Department. One level higher would be FFM's Vice President. Although Peter Ritchie had a lot of glory by Eric's side, this was the starting point of his career. After a brief moment of excitement, Peter Ritchie quickly nodded, "Thank you, Harvey. I'll do my best." Wayne Stan's smile didn't change. He looked at Eric and said, "So, when do you plan to start? I'll arrange it in advance." Peter Ritchie also looked at Eric. Eric put down the cutlery in his hand and smiled, "Next month. I'm going to the UK soon, so I won't be able to make a change. Of course, Peter, when you come back from the UK, you can apply for a month's leave. I remember that you haven't taken a break since you started working for me." Peter Ritchie was a little anxious. He shook his head and said, "That's not necessary. I can immediately get back to work." Eric smiled and nodded, "Of course, that's your choice." Wayne Stan also laughed and said, "Actually, young people should be like this. Look at all of us. It's Sunday and we're still working. Actually, I admire Eric for being able to do this. If I had as much money as you, I'd be hiding on a private island enjoying life." Eric shrugged and also laughed, "Okay, it seems that my style doesn't fit in your eyes." They chatted and laughed. After lunch, Wayne Stan asked again, "Eric, the first 3 episodes of Prison have been completed. Do you want to watch it together in the afternoon? I have something to do in the afternoon. It's been 2 weeks." Eric shook his head and said, "How about this? Get someone to send a sample to the Sharp Corner Manor. I'll take some time to watch it." "No problem." Wayne Stan nodded and gave Eric a heads up, "But Eric, I don't think this series is too good. At least, it's definitely not comparable to Machida Family." "That's natural. Any production company's work has its ups and downs. I've never expected all of FFM's films to be like Machida family. The overall strength of a TV station always depended on the overall quality of its series. It was the best state to continuously produce one or two popular series. If all the series produced were top-notch, not only would it be unrealistic, but it would also become mediocre after raising the audience's aesthetic standards. Eric's expectation for Prison was to exceed the average standard. After bidding farewell to Wayne Stan and Brad Gray, Eric took a car to the Trousdale Manor. He sent away his assistant and bodyguards and walked into Drew's mansion alone. In the living room of the mansion, Drew was lying on the glass coffee table in the middle of the living room, looking at a pile of aircraft information and drawings. There were also piles of papers scattered on the carpet and sofa next to him. The twins knelt on both sides of the coffee table and quietly advised the girl. Seeing Eric come in, the girl immediately waved a drawing in her hand. With a tone that was obviously more excited than annoyed, she said, "Eric, it's so messy. I didn't expect it to be so troublesome to buy a plane." Eric walked over and casually sat down on the carpet next to the girl. He took the drawing in her hand and looked at it. He said to Natasha next to him, "There will be guests later. Clean up the surroundings." "Yes, master," the two girls answered and quietly got up to tidy up. When he focused on the drawing in his hand, the girl's little head had already moved closer. "Eric, I suddenly don't want to buy a 777. "Oh. The Boeing 777 has two engines. I heard that the four engines of the 747 are safer. That's why the presidential plane is the 747. Eric smiled and said, "If you're worried about this, then there's no way to take a plane." "Hee, I'm afraid of death. Then I'll buy a 747. Eric smiled and followed the girl's idea. In fact, he also read a lot of aircraft information recently. The reason why the 747 used a four-engine design was mainly because of the lack of power of the aircraft engine at that time. Since the Boeing 757, due to the advancement of aviation materials and engine design, the Boeing company began to commonly use a twin-engine design. As for the reason that four engines was safer than two engines, this statement did make some sense. But in fact, during the flight process, even if all the engines of the plane suddenly failed, it would not directly fall from the sky. Instead, it would continue to glide. As long as it was done properly, it could still land safely. What's more, in the case of two engines failing at the same time, the probability of a plane being struck by lightning was hundreds or thousands of times lower. The probability of a plane being struck by lightning during flight was quite high. As for the failure of a single engine, it would not have much of an impact on flight. In some cases, the pilot would even take the initiative to shut down one engine. But the 777 is bigger. I still want to build a party plane. Then 777 it is. Wow, your tone is too perfunctory. Be careful, I'll buy both. Eric continued to nod. That's fine too. Chapter 882. Eric knew that the girl was interested in Boeing's latest Boeing 777-300 wide-body aircraft, which was also Boeing's largest passenger aircraft. Eric hugged the girl who threw herself at him because of his perfunctory attitude. He flipped through the information in front of him and said, "How about this? Buy two 747-400s. Although they're smaller than the 777-300, according to the capacity of 400 people, they'll definitely be enough for you to carry hundreds of people in the air after modification. Also, the 747-400 is Boeing's most mature aircraft model, and it has a four-engine design. According to what you said, it is very safe." Drew never had any objections to Eric's decisions. He was just a little surprised. "You're really buying two?" Eric nodded and said, "Of course. You can't always think about yourself. Kevin and Shashya are growing up. They can't always stay in New York. Buying two makes it convenient for everyone." The girl raised her face and asked, "But Eric, what about you?" Eric reached out and hugged the girl's waist. He squeezed and said, "Even you are mine." "Hee," the girl giggled and said, "Even so, you must have your own aircraft. Then buy three. Yes, you must buy 3. 3 is really not necessary. No one can fly every day. 2 is enough for everyone. Yes, maybe we can add 2 small business jets. They can also be used for domestic short-distance flights. Since he had decided to buy a private jet, Eric planned to let loose and be completely rich for once. In the next few years, whether it was the Firefly Group's own profits or the stock arbitrage taking advantage of the dot-com bubble, they would all bring him a large amount of cash. Even without these, Eric could easily pay for a few private jets if he sold some of the stocks he held in the major companies. According to the growth rate of the Firefly Group's companies in the past 6 months, Eric's net worth must have exceeded $100 billion. With his wealth accumulated to this extent, there was no need to save anything. After all, hundreds of millions of US dollars of expenditure would not have much effect on the further expansion of the Firefly Group. However, as Eric spoke, he thought of another problem. If he were to purchase 4 private jets at once and still use the airline's hosting method, not only would the cost be higher, but it would also be inconvenient to use. Eric instructed the twins to bring over a map. On the other side of Beverly Hills, Chrissy Jenner's family was about to rush to Trussdale Manor to meet Eric Williams. They were almost in a state of chaos. Originally, Robert Kardashian had some complaints about his ex-wife bringing her family to live in his house. However, when he heard that she had received an invitation from Arima Williams, he did not say anything. He was just a little envious of her inexplicable good luck. The eldest daughter, Kourtney Kardashian, looked at her mother tidying her younger sister's hair and the latest Chanel dress she was wearing. She even felt that she was adopted. She could not help but say sourly, "Why not shop Corner Manor? Maybe when you get to Trussdale Manor, you'll realize that all this is just a joke." How could Eric Williams like a country bumpkin like Kim? Kris Jenner slapped her eldest daughter's hand that was trying to make trouble and said, "Shut up. I think I heard Kendall crying. Let's go and see." Kourtney Kardashian pointed to her third sister, Kola Kardashian, and said, "You go." Kola Kardashian did not move. She looked at her stepfather behind her. Bruce Jenner smiled helplessly and turned to walk out. Kourtney Kardashian tugged at Kim Kardashian unwillingly and said, "Mom, why don't I go with you?" Kris Jenner sprayed some perfume on her daughter and sniffed her. She nodded in satisfaction and said to Kourtney Kardashian, "Don't make trouble. It's a big deal. However, I'll try to invite Williams. If he agrees, you'll be able to see him soon." Kourtney Kardashian pursed her lips and said, "As if he'll agree." Kim Kardashian got up and proudly turned around in front of the full-length mirror. She glanced at her sister and said, "Kourtney, you continue to make sarcastic remarks here. If Mom doesn't get the contract, we'll definitely have to go back to New York." "Do you want to go back to New York?" "I don't care. You're the one who wants to stay in Los Angeles, right?" "Of course, I've had enough of those girls on the Upper East Side." Kim Kardashian adjusted the straps of her long dress and said confidently, "However, they'll definitely treat me differently in the future." "Humph, if it weren't for Paris, you wouldn't have seen Eric Williams. If it weren't for her being so insensible, I wouldn't have been kicked out so quickly." "All right, stop arguing." Kris Jenner looked at her watch. It would take about 20 minutes to get from Robert Kardashian's house to the Trussdale Manor. They had agreed to meet at 2:00. Although it was 1:20 now, she still decided to set off early. She sternly glanced at her other children and said, "All of you stay at home obediently. Also, take good care of Kendall and Kelly." "Got it, Mom." Kourtney and the others reluctantly responded. They looked enviously at their mother leaving with Kim and their stepfather. Although they set off early, the three of them calculated the time and arrived at the door of Drew's mansion 5 minutes earlier. After parking the car on the side of the road outside the mansion, Kris Jenner gave Kim Kardashian a few last words before she rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door opened. A Russian lady in a lady's blouse and black trousers with an air of an office lady opened the door. She looked at Kris Jenner and the other two and said, "Ms. Jenner, please come with me. The master is waiting for you." Kris Jenner and the other two were stunned when they heard the address in Natasha's words. They only reacted when they saw the lady turn her body to the side. They quickly stepped through the door and followed the twins to the mansion. Looking at Natasha's tall and slender figure and beautiful face, Kris Jenner couldn't help but turn around and take a look at her daughter. When they walked into the living room, Kris Jenner and the other two immediately noticed Eric and Drew standing at a long table in the corner of the living room. They were pointing at something on the table. Eric naturally saw the three of them coming in. He just pointed at the sofa and motioned for them to sit first. Kris Jenner and the other two did not dare to expect Eric to treat them too warmly. They sat down on the sofa and watched another Russian lady serve them coffee. Kris Jenner could not help but look at her daughter again. Kim Kardashian already felt inferior in front of Natasha and her sister. When she saw her mother looking at her with obvious contrast in her eyes, she was very dissatisfied. She thought to herself, "Aren't you the one who gave birth to me?" At the long table, Eric nodded to the three of them and turned his attention to the map in front of him. He pointed at Long Island in New York and the San Fernando Valley in the north of Los Angeles and said, "Here and here, we can build airports in these two places and set up specialized aviation management companies. In this way, not only the 4 planes in our plan, but all the private planes in the entire Firefly system can take off and land conveniently on the east and west coasts. I will contact them in the next few days. I think Chris, Katzenberg, and the others will definitely be interested in buying private planes. Everyone can afford it now. In another 2 years, more people in the Firefly system will be able to afford private planes. According to what you said, maybe Firefly will have more private planes than many airlines in the future. Maybe we should buy a bigger place now." The girl was very excited. Eric had described to her the huge growth potential of Firefly's investment in Yahoo and other companies. The girl believed in Eric's words without a doubt. Her little hand moved away from the United States and pointed to Europe. She waved it near London, England, and said, "Eric, why don't we build a private airport in London?" Eric shook his head and smiled. "It's enough to build an airport on the east and west coasts. There's no need to build one in England now. Okay, let's stop here first. There are still guests waiting." "Okay." Drew ordered Natasha to put away the map and walk to the sofa with Eric. Eric and the girl did not deliberately lower their voices when they spoke just now. Jenna and her family were secretly speechless when they heard their conversation. Bruce Jenner had accumulated a net worth of tens of millions over the years, but they could not afford to rent a private plane, let alone buy one. Not to mention a private airport. They did not even dare to think about it. However, Kris Jenner turned to look at her daughter. Until now, she firmly believed that the reason Eric gave her such an opportunity must have something to do with her daughter. She was not comparing her daughter with the twins just now. She was just curious about what part of her daughter attracted Eric Williams. Seeing Eric walking over with Drew, the three of them quickly got up and glanced at Eric beside Drew. Kris Jenner suddenly felt some eagerness in her heart. Drew Barrymore's background was not much better than her daughter's. If her daughter could hook up with Eric Williams, then private planes and private airports would definitely not be too far away from them. If she could enjoy such a luxurious life in this life, even if she had to sacrifice all her daughters, it would be worth it. Some thoughts ran through her mind. She noticed that Eric was approaching and reaching out his hand to her husband with a smile. Kris Jenner quickly pulled herself together. "Hello, Mr. Jenner. I'm glad you took the time to come over." Eric and Bruce Jenner exchanged pleasantries. Bruce Jenner did not know that Eric had said that he could participate in the reality show planning. Kris Jenner had specifically told her daughter to keep this matter a secret. Therefore, Bruce Jenner consciously put himself in the position of a chaperone. He smiled and shook hands with Eric and said, "Hello, Mr. Williams. Call me Eric." Eric smiled and shook hands with Kris Jenner. They chatted briefly and then greeted Kim Kardashian. "Kim, we meet again." "Yes, Eric." Kim Kardashian wanted to act more familiar, but in the end, she could not think of anything to say. After a simple greeting, both sides sat down again. The twins came over and handed Kris Jenner's reality show proposal to Eric. After flipping through the folder in his hand, Eric said to Kris Jenner, "Kris, I've read the proposal you wrote. Also, I agree with your idea of changing the Hollywood Girls to Beverly Hills Girls. Kris Jenner's reality show proposal accurately captured the two key points of lifestyle reality shows, tearing and showing off. These were undoubtedly important elements to catch the audience's attention. Not only that, Kris Jenner also suggested that Eric's idea of only Hollywood be expanded and changed into a reality show for rich girls in Beverly Hills. Not only could this still create a connection with Hollywood, but if it was successful, they could also continue to produce similar series in other parts of the United States. After Eric finished reading the proposal, he even thought of another well-known reality show in his memory: Beverly Wives, New York Wives, Miami Wives, and so on. Eric had not seen the Beverly Wives reality show in his previous life. However, since this series could develop so many branches, it must be very successful. Moreover, the Beverly Wives reality show was suitable for both Lifetime TV and MGM's upcoming E! Entertainment. If Kris Jenner could successfully produce this reality show proposal, Eric did not mind letting her continue to be in charge of the Beverly Wives series. As soon as Eric finished speaking, Kris Jenner could not wait and said, "Way, Eric, so, I got this job?" Eric nodded and said, "You can say that. However, I still have some questions." Kris Jenner felt that she had lost her composure just now. She calmed herself down and said, "Of course, please ask." "It's like this," Eric continued. "I'm very satisfied with the production proposal you came up with. However, you seem to have missed one point, which is the problem of publicity." In Eric's opinion, although Kris Jenner had captured the essence of tearing and showing off, her greatest potential should be in hype. In the original space-time, the Kardashians could appear on the gossip news when they went out for a stroll. That kind of pervasive hype was the foundation of the success of Walking with the Kardashians. The mastermind behind all this was the head of the Kardashian family, Kris Jenner. At this time, Eric naturally wanted to stimulate her potential in this aspect. Chapter 883. P.S. Last night, the back end lagged, causing 2 chapters to be uploaded in a row. The content of this chapter has been changed to Chapter 883. The author cannot change the title of the chapter. I will contact the editor as soon as possible. Readers who have subscribed to the client, open the table of contents and click on the chapter name to refresh the content. Kris Jenner was stunned and was a little confused. "Eric, shouldn't the TV station be responsible for publicity?" Eric began to guide her patiently. If it's a TV series, the TV station can naturally take full responsibility for publicity. But for reality shows, if you want to get better ratings, you need the production team to take the initiative to create more topics for the show. Just like Lifetime TV's America's Top Model, in addition to this show, Cindy Crawford, who is the producer and host, also participates in the Victoria's Secret show every year and continuously attends various fashion events. Occasionally, she will also appear in movies or TV series. The contestants who participate in the reality show will also use their personal websites and other channels to showcase themselves as much as possible. These seemingly unrelated details can actually bring more popularity to America's Top Model. Therefore, it has been able to maintain very good viewership ratings. Eric, if you need me to personally promote it, I naturally won't refuse. Kris Jenner roughly understood and said, "However, the girls invited by our reality show will definitely not be celebrities. In this case, there won't be any topics to dig out from them. Moreover, even I am a celebrity." As Kris Jenner spoke, she looked at Eric with some hope in her eyes. Eric naturally understood Kris Jenner's thoughts. She wanted him to personally promote the popularity of the reality show. However, Eric didn't have the intention to do so. If he personally promoted the TV programs in the Firefly system too frequently, then gradually, it wouldn't have any effect. "I definitely won't do it." Eric shook his head and said, "You can only do it yourself. Just like Project Runway and America's Top Model, I didn't do much at that time. Linda and Cindy still did very well." Kris Jenner was a little disappointed. "In this case, it won't be so easy to promote it." "Of course it won't be easy. There aren't many things in this world where one can just sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. Chrissy Jenna thought that her lack of confidence had displeased Eric, so she quickly tried to remedy the situation. "No, Eric, that's not what I meant." Waving his hand, Eric smiled. "It's not easy to create a reality show from scratch, not to mention that the main creator and actors aren't famous. But this is a very important opportunity for you and the girls who are participating in this reality show. You have to understand that if it were too easy, these opportunities wouldn't have fallen upon you." "I know, Eric." Chris Jenna nodded and said, "Then specifically, what kind of help can I get from the Firefly Group? Can you tell me in more detail?" "Oh, I seem to have forgotten to mention that," Eric said. "This reality show will be produced by MGM. Firefly won't be participating, and the broadcast platform hasn't been confirmed yet. However, when the time comes, as long as it's necessary, Firefly will provide sufficient resources." Chris Jenna quickly sorted out the information Eric revealed. After thinking for a moment, she probed, "Eric, in the plan, one of the girls participating in the reality show will want to develop in Hollywood. For the sake of the progress of the plot, can Firefly or MGM provide some additions and allow the crew to film the whole process? Of course, if the other party's acting skills are good enough, not only will they be able to audition, but they will also be able to provide some acting opportunities." Eric understood that Chris Jenna was testing his support for the reality show, so he nodded without hesitation. Firefly and MGM, and if Fox were included, the total number of films produced and released by the three companies each year would reach hundreds. It was easy to provide such an opportunity. The purpose of the integration of media resources was to achieve a synergistic effect as much as possible, so such cooperation was completely natural. With Eric's promise, Chris Jenna was also relieved. Everyone began to discuss the details of the reality show's production in detail. The first was naturally the name. According to Chris Jenna's idea, it would be called Beverly Girls. The program team would select 5 girls from Beverly Hills with different personalities, ages, occupations, and family backgrounds through open recruitment and other forms, and use the camera to record every bit of their lives. Of course, the program team would definitely communicate with the girls in advance and plan a rough plot line for each girl, and try to dig out as many elements that the audience would like to see and hear. On the other hand, although Eric was very confident in Chris Jenna, he would not be too blind. In order to avoid risks, the first season of Beverly Girls would only have 8 episodes, and each episode would be 45 minutes long. It could be considered as testing the waters. The show was expected to be produced in the second half of the year and broadcast in the spring of next year. Eric did not intend to intervene in the detailed production process, so his expectations for this reality show were not too high. Since the production cost of a lifestyle reality show was much lower than that of a competitive reality show, MGM could continue to produce it as long as the ratings could reach the renewal standard. Of course, this type of reality show had not appeared in the major TV stations yet. The audience liked new things, so the probability of failure was actually very low. After discussing until the evening and finalizing all the details, Eric said, "Then, that's it for the time being. The person in charge of the MGM TV production department will contact you specifically. Of course, if there are any problems that are difficult to solve, you can also contact me and Drew." It was not dinner time yet. Chris Jenna also realized that Eric did not intend to keep them for dinner. She sensibly took the initiative to stand up. "In that case, we'll take our leave. But Eric, do you have time recently? Bruce and I are planning to hold a party." Eric shook his head and said, "That's not necessary. I have to go to the UK next week, so I might not have time." Chris Jenna saw that Eric directly rejected her, so she did not continue to pester him. She only felt that it was a pity that Eric did not look at her daughter for the entire afternoon. However, she was already very satisfied that she had successfully obtained the position of producer of Beverly Girls. Eric's explanation of the marketing methods of reality shows in the afternoon made her feel as if she had seen a faint opening of a door. At this time, she didn't have too many other thoughts. After all, since she got this job, she will have many opportunities to interact with him in the future. There was no need to be too anxious. After a busy week, It was a new Monday. Eric began to focus all his energy on the final stage of the promotion of 007 Casino Royale. In Southeast Asia, after the weekend, the international currency speculators did not hesitate to launch a fierce attack on the Thai baht. After 2 days of preparation over the weekend, the Thai government also began to counterattack. The exchange rate war might sound like a high-end term, but in reality, the game between the attacker and the defender is more like the cold weapons era. Firstly, to attack Thai baht's exchange rate, the international currency speculators will dump their baht at low prices. Secondly, to stabilize the exchange rate, the Thai government will use their foreign reserves to buy up the baht dumped by the speculators to stop the exchange rate from falling. The international currency speculators will either buy high and sell low or borrow at high interest rates. Every time they dump Thai baht, they will suffer losses. Similarly, the Thai government's forex reserves are limited, and with $90 billion of international debt, it is difficult for them to borrow USD from the outside. Once their forex reserves are depleted, it will mean that they have failed to protect their exchange rate. This war is about who can last until the end. However, there wasn't much suspense about the final result from the beginning of this game. Thailand's forex reserves are only $36 billion, and the Thai government can only use $10 billion. But the international currency speculators are eyeing Thai baht. Just the two funds owned by Soros are worth more than $10 billion. Even if the Thai government uses up all $10 billion, it will only bring $1 to $2 billion of losses to the international currency speculators. But once Thai baht is lost, based on the 50% depreciation rate, the short position of Thai baht, which is worth tens of billions of USD, will bring returns to the international forex speculators. Once the financial crisis breaks out, the other countries in Southeast Asia will devalue their currencies and bring a bigger feast for the international currency speculators. The premiere of James Bond, Casino Royale, would be held on Thursday night in London, England. Since it was a working day in Southeast Asia, Eric had no time to spare. He woke up early on Monday morning and spent half a day recording an episode of The Late Show with David Letterman on ABC to promote Casino Royale. At the same time, MGM and Time Warner reached an agreement on E! The negotiations for the entertainment shares also came to a conclusion. Time Warner finally agreed to the 39.5% of E! The entertainment shares insisted on the price of $670 million, and there was no room for compromise. Since that was the case, after communicating with Eric, Amy Pascal agreed. MGM's movie business had brought in huge profits in the past 2 years, and they only have about $500 million left from the $1 billion they acquired through the share issue. MGM could afford a deal of $670 million without any financing. However, the matter did not end there. Originally, it was just a cover for them to send an invitation to Basic Cable to acquire Rainbow Media. They did not expect to receive a positive response. Although the other party said that they were only willing to sell 20% of Rainbow Media shares, they were willing to compete with Comcast and Telcom. Entertainment's attitude is similar. Basic Cable also said that once the deal is successful, they will hand over the operating rights of Rainbow Media's Bravo TV station to MGM. MGM has been in decline for 20 years. After getting control of the company, to avoid repeating the same mistakes due to rapid expansion, Eric rejected many of MGM's development plans, such as rebuilding the studio base. After cooperating with Fox's Blue Sky Studio, he did not let MGM start the animation film business. This is the reason why half of the $1 billion financing is still left. Now, in the face of Rainbow Media's olive branch, Eric's heart became a little conflicted. On the one hand, the next few years can be said to be MGM's last chance to develop the cable television business. After the consolidation of media groups is over, it will cost a lot to enter this field. Eric really wants to acquire E! Entertainment and buy a part of Rainbow Media's shares. But on the other hand, acquiring 2 TV stations at once will increase the operational risk. Not to mention, Rainbow Media is much bigger than E! Entertainment TV station. The 20% equity price is almost the same as MGM's acquisition of E! Entertainment's value is the same. If negotiations officially start, MGM will definitely fight for more shares. Then, if MGM wants to complete this deal without affecting the company's operations, it can only issue bonds for financing. But if Rainbow Media's operations are not good after the acquisition, it will definitely drag down the entire MGM group. The debt ratio will increase, profitability will decrease. Once it enters a vicious cycle, MGM is likely to go the same way. However, Eric had a detailed discussion with Amy Pascal before he left Los Angeles. In the end, he decided to start negotiations with the basic cable company. Fortunately, the purchase of a private jet and the construction of a private airport is not something that can be done overnight. Eric only took the time to communicate with Chris, Katzenberg, and the other senior executives of Firefly, and instructed his assistant office to draw up a detailed plan first. The specific situation will have to wait until this busy period is over. In addition, after last weekend, the box office of Firefly's Finding Nemo dropped only 33% this weekend. Coupled with the high starting point of US $70.25 million in the first weekend, Finding Nemo earned US $46.58 million in the last 3 days of the second week, firmly occupying the top of the box office rankings. The cumulative box office reached US $140 million. In just 10 days of release, it has successfully surpassed The Lion King 2, which had a cumulative box office of US $137 million in the fourth week of release, and temporarily became the North American box office champion of 1997. In comparison, Batman and Robin, which was released in the first week, was dragged down by a worse reputation than Godzilla. The box office for 3 days in a row fell. After US $16.11 million on the first day and US $15.09 million on the second day, the box office on Sunday fell again to US $11.66 million. In the end, Batman and Robin only earned $42.87 million at the box office in the first 3 days. Compared to the drop curve of Godzilla, whether or not Batman and Robin's box office could break the 100 million mark would depend on whether Time Warner was willing to pay for the box office. The failure of the fourth live-action blockbuster in the summer caused many media outlets to start to look down on the upcoming James Bond, Casino Royale. Most people didn't seem to have any expectations about whether Eric's new film could escape the curse of this summer's live-action blockbuster. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,